Good morning and welcome to the Melbourne EdTech Summit. We're having a technical difficulty with our Master of Ceremonies this morning, Hope Delino, so we'll try and resolve that really soon. In the meantime, you get to put up with me. So welcome to the Melbourne EdTech Summit. We are connecting educators, EdTech entrepreneurs and industry stakeholders for discussions around the future of education innovation. Each morning we focus on thought leadership, featuring some of Australia's leading minds at the intersection of education and digital innovation. Each afternoon we will focus on EdTech entrepreneurship with discussions on the future of the Australian EdTech ecosystem led by experienced Australian and global EdTech entrepreneurs. The Melbourne EdTech Summit is only possible with our summit partners, Global Victoria, Practera and AWS EdStart, who have helped bring this entire program to life. Let us pause for a moment and begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land upon which we gather. So as we gather today physically dispersed and virtually connected, allow me to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land of Australia and recognise their continuous and unbroken connection to the land, waters and culture across the country. Today I join you from the traditional land of the Boon Wurrung and Woy Wurrung people of the Kulin Nations. I extend all our respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. And I specifically extend my respects to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who have joined us today. Just a little bit of housekeeping about the conference platform that you're using. Let me introduce it very briefly to you. You can see the complete agenda by clicking at the bottom and then selecting any one of the days. You can build your own private schedule by clicking the heart icon at the bottom of any of the sessions. Your personal schedule will then be accessible from the heart icon at the top right. Clicking the details tab on any of the sessions allows you to read more about the session, the presenters, this is where you can ask some questions, and you can actually chat here with your fellow delegates. You can actually upvote their questions and you can get them to the top of the pile, and then at some point a moderator will actually bring them into the live stream room. Using the participants icon, you can also see everybody else is at the summit this morning, and you can connect with them. You can arrange a video meeting, you can even chat with them, whatever it might be. Please allow me to welcome Hayley Bolding, the Program Director at Practera, and James Edwards, Special Advisor on India from Global Victoria, to give us an official welcome this morning. Hi Hayley and hi James.
Thanks so much, David, and a warm welcome to all of you. As David said, my name is Hayley. I'm the Director of Programs at Practera. We're a very proud Australian EdTech company, and it's really my privilege to do the official welcome here today. Before I begin, I would also like to offer and pay my respects to the Aboriginal people of the land that I'm coming to you from today, and obviously my respects to elders past, present and emerging. So in doing the welcome here today, obviously the context for EduGrowth, and obviously for those just joining us today, EduGrowth is Australia's education technology innovation hub, and it's through connection and collaboration that EduGrowth works to accelerate Australia's EdTech ecosystem globally. This vision that EduGrowth has really around transforming global communities, and really by doing that through enabling the growth of Australian EdTech. And this summit is home base for that agenda. And so we really do welcome all of you here today. This is such an important program in terms of bringing leaders from around Australia, so welcome, and also internationally to our international guests, wherever you might be right now. My warmest welcome to you, on day 2 of this really exciting program. Now, for someone like me, I love a conference. I love going to conferences, mainly because of the ideas and the information that I get out of it. But more often than not, I love going to conferences because of the conference buddies and friends that you meet along the way. I'm very known to make best friends with the person that I sit next to on the first day, and obviously the connections and collaborations over the lifetime that post a conference are really impactful. In fact, it was because I met the founders of Practera at a conference just like this a couple of years ago. The conversations we had, the connections we made, led me to actually being able to get a job and have the privilege of working in this sector every day. So those kind of connections, they're real and they're lasting, and they're incredibly important in terms of building the ecosystem and transforming the innovation agenda around education. So as David just outlined the platform, I'd really encourage all of us to use the features. We're all coming to each other digitally. We're not going to have to fight anyone for that last stale muffin in at the morning tea session. But the connections that you make here can still be really lasting. So yeah, use the platform, reach out to a speaker whose ideas may have really sparked something new, connect with other delegates, because those conversations now and the collaborations that move forward really are that glue and that fabric that drive this ecosystem forward. So I really want to also thank all the outstanding speakers that EduGrowth has gathered and that are coming up from today. You've got an amazing lineup, so stay tuned for that. And really, on behalf of EduGrowth, Practera, and the other sponsors, I'd really like to wish you the warmest welcome and all the best for the rest of the day. And with that, I'll hand over to James.
Good morning, and thank you, David and Hayley. Welcome, everybody. It's wonderful to be here. My name's James Edwards. I'm the Special Advisor for India and also Global Victoria's Manager of the Global Education Network. Global Victoria is delighted to be a sponsor of the inaugural Melbourne EdTech Summit alongside fellow sponsors Practera and AWS EdStart. On behalf of the Victorian Government, I too would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands across Victoria and Australia in which we're all gathered today, and their ongoing connection to this land. I personally am working on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. I pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. I also pay my respects to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders of the lands in which each of you may be working today. And I acknowledge Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander participants who may be here with us today. So welcome to day 2 of the Melbourne EdTech Summit. It's wonderful to see so many people joining us here from across the world for this exciting 3-day program where we'll explore and celebrate EdTech and education innovation. There's no doubt that there's a growing demand for EdTech globally. The global EdTech market is estimated to be worth $342 billion by 2025, presenting significant opportunities for all of us. As such, this summit will provide a valuable opportunity to bring together Australian EdTech leaders, innovators, to discuss important challenges and opportunities facing the sector today and into the future. As you may know, Global Victoria is the Victorian Government's trade agency. We welcome the business world to Victoria and open the world to Victorian businesses. We have an expert team right here in Melbourne and an extensive network of international offices, 23 in fact, Victorian Government trade and investment offices in key education markets. Our team is ready to help you and your organisation to open doors to contacts that can help expand your horizons and make your global ambitions a reality. The Victorian Government has outlined its objective to build Victoria as an EdTech and e-learning hub in our international education strategy. Victoria's expertise in the delivery of education services is home to world-leading online program management companies and education thought leaders, and also has a strong reputation for delivering high-quality international education through our world-renowned universities. So this morning, we've got another exciting leg of the summit ahead of us. We'll be hearing from thought leaders and education experts with a focus on student employability and the future of work. Let me congratulate and thank the EduGrowth team. David, hope he'll be joining us as well too as the MC shortly, for delivering this incredible summit. Without their expertise and their commitment to the EdTech sector here in Australia, this summit wouldn't be possible. I'd also like to thank our fellow sponsors, Practera and AWS EdStart, and of course, thank all of today's participants and speakers. So on behalf of Global Victoria, thank you for joining and enjoy today's proceedings. Thanks, David, and back to you.
Thanks very much, guys. Hayley, I can thank you so much for reminding us to use the conference platform. People, I can assure you, if we were physically face to face, we would have no stale muffins. There's no requirement. We're not allowed to have stale muffins at EduGrowth events. Thanks very much, James. And I really do want to thank our summit partners who have been integral. Global Victoria, Practera, obviously led by some incredible Australian EdTech founders, Beau, Wes and Susie, and Global Victoria for your ongoing unwavering support, and AWS EdStart, who are really helping us bring our entrepreneurship program together each afternoon. So thanks very much, Hayley. Thanks, James. We're going to move into our program. I think we've got a little video we're going to show right now, and then I'll be back to introduce our next session. That was a great little introduction video from Maddocks, who are a strategic partner of EduGrowth. And it's really my great pleasure to welcome Lindy Richardson and introduce her. She's going to be actually moderating our next session, which is about the evolution of the workforce. Lindy is a partner at Maddocks and an employment lawyer with extensive experience advising on industrial relations, employment, anti-discrimination, and they're probably best to help us navigate this future of work conversation we're about to have. Lindy has had a significant involvement in employment-related litigation, including before the Fair Work Commission, the Federal Court, the Federal Circuit Court of Australia, and VCAT. So, Lindy, thank you very much, and I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, David, and welcome to the session this morning, everyone. From my front bedroom in Stage 4, Melbourne. I'd like to introduce our speaker, who I'm going to be having a conversation with this morning, Michael Priddis. Michael is a strategy and change management specialist. He's the founder and CEO of Faethm AI, the world's data source for the fourth industrial revolution and the future of work. Faethm enables companies and governments to navigate and prosper from emerging technologies, including AI, robotics, advanced materials, and IoT, which I had to look up this morning, Michael, to explain to me what that was. So welcome to Michael, and look forward to having a chat with you over the next 20 minutes or so. So let's start with introducing Faethm AI. Where did the idea come from? And could you tell me how it might be a bit different from when you founded it in 2017?
Yeah, certainly. So my previous job was I was a partner at the Boston Consulting Group and the managing director of the digital ventures practice for Asia. And in the course of the 10 years or so prior to founding Faethm, I've worked across many industries in about 25 different countries and really been focusing on the impact of emerging technology. Whilst my work was focused on designing and building new products and services, new business models and new companies in some cases, there was very little attention being paid by our clients, by governments, by major corporations around the world to the workforce effect of technological change. And so in 2014, I did some work while still at BCG with CSIRO and for the Australian government to model the effect of emerging technology on Australian jobs, Australian industries, Australian education. With that in my hand, I proposed to BCG that we build a data platform to help companies and governments around the world to understand and really model the effect of what has now become known as the future of work. BCG said they'd rather I just keep selling projects around Asia, and so I left and set up Faethm. We launched the business in 2016 and spent about a year building the first version of the data platform, which we launched at the end of 2017. And really then, as most minimum viable products are, we were really looking at just a small subsection of technologies on a particular range of industries. Since 2017, though, our platform has grown to describe now 72,000 different jobs in every industry, in every country. We've got clients in 21 industries in 25 countries, and we've set up offices from our base here in Sydney, now in London, New York, and San Francisco. We've got clients including people like MasterCard, Rio Tinto, Telstra, the British Ministry of Justice, the Canadian Border Force, companies like Adobe, Singtel, Department of Foreign Affairs, so quite varied.
How has Faethm AI added value to the way that all of those varied organisations operate?
So I think that the main thing is just to tackle head on this notion of the term future of work. I think, given that I'm working in this space, that it's the worst possible term that we could have for the period that we're in. When you say future of anything to anybody, you're basically allowing them to kind of defer any sort of action and to think this is something that's coming at some stage in the future. This is much better thought of as the now of work or the evolution of work. Many of us will be very familiar with technology programs underway in major companies around the world at the moment that are having very disruptive effects on the way that people work. So this is not something that's happening in the future. And so the number one thing that we've been doing is giving companies and governments tools and data and insights to help them understand what the impact of technology is today and tomorrow, so that they can model the transition of people within the workforce. They can say, okay, we have somebody in a role today, that, let's say accounting or call centers or manufacturing or warehousing. We're going to deploy a particular type of technology, could be RPA, could be voice AI, could be robotics, any type of technology that they're looking at, and show them the effect on today's jobs so that they can reskill or upskill people into jobs of tomorrow. And so a couple of examples as to how that's happened. I can't really talk to you about specific companies, but I can give you some government examples. So 2 years ago, one of our partners, PwC, built a product called Skills Bridge for the Luxembourg government. That was a pilot for the EU, and it sits on top of Faethm software. And it provides every adult in every company in Luxembourg with a skills pathway, an education pathway from today's jobs to tomorrow's. In 2018, Google funded the world's biggest private innovation hub, which is the Mars Discovery District in Toronto, to build a very similar platform for Canadians called PlanX. And again, that sits on top of Faethm software. So what we've been able to do, Lindy, is to show companies and governments that A, this is not just an issue that's happening in the future, and B, there are some very ready data, insights that describe what people do today, what their jobs in the future will look like, what the skills and learning and development pathway is, and then to connect content and learning and development providers to those companies, to those governments, to those individuals, so they can effect that transition.
Fantastic. And I assume that what you've been discussing there is it's not just a responsibility of the government to think about these things at a more macro level, that companies need to think of that at a micro level within the terms of what they do themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a kind of crazy sort of situation at the moment where, because large companies are so separated in silos and geography, they don't have this kind of universal kind of access to data across the organization in terms of their workforce. So we have these sorts of situations emerging where finance departments are looking at deploying automating technologies into finance, let's say robotic process automation, and are looking at reducing the number of accountants, clerks, bookkeepers, and so on in those teams. Elsewhere in the same organization, there's a cybersecurity gap. We all know that cybersecurity is becoming a really key issue for enterprises, and there's resultingly a global cybersecurity talent shortage, a skills gap. It turns out when you use our data to kind of peel back the job titles of accountants in cyber, they're actually very similar jobs. They're analytical, they're working in a corporate environment, they're not working in a mine or a field or on a ship or what have you. So the location of work is very similar. The type of work is very similar. It's analytical, it's using computers, analysing numbers, deriving patterns, applying that information, generating insights to help managers make better decisions. The gap between accountants and cyber analysts is cybersecurity knowledge, and that's a trainable gap. So it makes much better sense, rather than these accounting departments looking at deploying technology that automates those accountants out, to say, well, hang on a second, we can teach these people cyber skills and transition them internally into these new roles that are very hard for us to fill. And so the smartest companies, the governments that are really thinking strategically about this, use our software to say, how do we affect the transition? And the really important thing that I really want to kind of land with the people listening today is that the media around the world would have us believe that this is some sort of jobs apocalypse. And I'm talking now until COVID. We might get to that in a second. But until January or February, the newspapers around the world for the last few years have been saying, jobs Armageddon, end of white collar work, hollowing out of blue collar workers, and starting to explore things like universal basic income as a supposedly serious kind of tool that governments should be applying, because they're looking at the mass loss of work. We don't see it that way. We think this is not the end of work. This is a rapid at-scale transition to new types of jobs, and that we affect that transition by firstly investing in technology and secondly investing in learning and development. So absolutely, Lindy, this is a job for companies as much as governments. Governments and companies need to collaborate a bit better on that, and that's something we can explore if you want. But very much this is a topic for companies to get hold of, to say, we don't need to spend all this money shedding staff and spend all this money hiring other staff. We should be spending a lot less retaining our staff. It is cheaper to retrain and redeploy than make redundant and rehire. And so really this is about affecting this transition so that we don't lose people from the workforce, and instead we're investing in skills development.
Fantastic. We've got a couple of questions. So are you involved with the Digital Skills Organisation as part of a government initiative?
Yes. Faethm's chairman is Yasmin Allen. Yasmin is also the chairman of the Digital Skills Organisation.
And how do you think AI will impact the EdTech ecosystem?
I think there's a number of things that are kind of critical for EdTech. I apologise if there are any politicians on this call. I don't mean to be critical of politicians specifically, but if I had $1 for every time I heard a politician say, we're going to solve this issue with a culture of lifelong learning, then I wouldn't need to go to work. This is a common kind of throwaway comment. But there are half a dozen major gaps between the promise of lifelong learning and delivery. And those gaps are things that EdTech can solve. So firstly, this is not a 2 or 3 year problem. So firstly, we need government investment and corporate investment that spans multiple electoral cycles and multiple corporate cycles. We're not just talking about something we do now and forget about. It's something that we need to be funding ongoing. So we need to be helping governments and companies to identify those sources of funding and to show them the business case to invest over a 5, 10, 15-year period. Lifelong learning needs to be lifelong. We need to fund it. Secondly, we're not teaching history or geography or another language where the content stays the same year on year. We're teaching dynamic content that changes. The world is changing, technology is changing, businesses and so on, products and services are changing. The content needs to change too. So we need to be investing in content creation to meet that emerging demand. Thirdly, this is not something that's happening in small pockets. This is happening across the board. Our analysis says that in Australia, there are 3.8 million Australians who will need some form of skills development over the next 5 years. We are not going to get 3.8 million Australians through TAFE or the Australian Graduate School of Management. The only way we can do this is by combining online with offline channels and providing this kind of content at scale. And this is clearly a job for EdTech. It's not something that universities are set up to do. That also then leads into the fourth issue, which is around changing university business models. Universities have been focused on providing 12, 24 or 36-month courses really for the last couple of hundred years. We don't need those types of courses anymore. We need 12, 24 or 36-hour or 12, 24, 36-day courses. Content needs to be delivered in context. It needs to be much more skills development rather than knowledge. It needs to be very applicable. And as one of my old bosses used to say, the half-life of learning is about 30 minutes unless you apply it. So we need to give people the opportunity to not just get information, but practice that as part of that learning experience. Lastly, this is a growth industry. So, I'm not a financial advisor, and so, take this with a pinch of salt if you wish. But if I had money to invest, I would be investing in EdTech right now. Given the size of the need and the low level of supply, we've got a massive imbalance between demand and supply, not just in this country, but worldwide. So this is very much a growth industry. And so those EdTech companies really should be thinking about how do they kind of tackle these sorts of issues at scale.
Fantastic. I want to move on to a different topic. We hear the term the fourth industrial revolution to describe the current development phase, but you refer to it as the third renaissance. Yeah. Can you outline your thoughts on this and what the difference in terminology might mean to you?
Yeah, I think we have a problem with branding here and a problem of kind of communication. So I should mention first up that Faethm was the first company in Asia Pacific to be invited to join the World Economic Forum's Centre for the Fourth Industrial Revolution. I'm also a member of the World Economic Forum's Global AI Council, which is 32 people, includes the president of Microsoft, the chairman of MasterCard, the director of AI at Stanford, and so on. So I've delivered this type of criticism a number of times, including to people like the World Economic Forum. And my thinking goes a bit like this. The term revolution is a hostile term, right? It implies high levels of disruption. It implies oppositional forces. It implies revolts. It implies sudden and it's very much a conflict term. When also we think then about industrial revolutions, we think about previous industrial revolutions. I grew up in the north of England. When you say industrial revolution to me, and I suspect many people on this call, we'll be thinking about factories, we'll be thinking about these kind of grimy old towns and kind of hostile working environments, winners and losers, company versus employee, and so on. The term industrial revolution is not a friendly term, and it doesn't invoke any sense of optimism or any sense of there's actually something good going on here. I much prefer the term third renaissance. There have been two instances in history when science and technology have transformed every job. Firstly, in the 15th, 16th century, and then earlier before that in about the 13th, 14th century. And if you were a shipbuilder, if you worked in the fields, if you worked in the courts or the banking system or merchants or whatever, your job changed completely, fundamentally, because science and technology took some major evolutionary steps. We refer to those as the first and second Renaissance. I don't see any reason why this should not be viewed as a third Renaissance, a mass humanization of work, using technology to do the things that we're not built to do, but using technology to empower us to become more human at work, to be more creative, to have a more humanistic approach to how we employ people, and to kind of forget about those kind of rows of desks of people doing analysis or, those kind of heavy sort of industrial environments, and be thinking about how technology can provide us with tools that automate the things that we shouldn't be doing and allows us to focus much more on things that we should.
And so that leads into the next question, that human skills are still essential. And I think what I've just heard, you're totally in agreement with that. They're still very much essential for being successful at work and will be for the foreseeable future. Yeah. How does creativity, separate from those technical proficiencies, factor into this?
So I have a kind of a phrase to try and sort of describe how creativity and those sort of human skills should be thought of in the context of automation. So it goes something like this. Computers are good at the jobs we find hard and bad at the jobs we find easy. And what I mean by that is that we're not built as human beings to do certain things. We've always used tools to do them. So we're not built to calculate. We're not built to lift and carry heavy objects. We're not built to fetch things from A to B. We're not built to do repetitive tasks. We're not built to work in dangerous or mundane circumstances and so on. We are built as humans to be creative, communicative, caring, empathetic, to deal with ambiguity, to have risk tolerance, to be entrepreneurial or to have initiative and to make things. And throughout history, we've used tools to help us do the first set of jobs. And those tools are getting more and more sophisticated to the extent that they're now better than us at doing those things. And that's why we're now automating those tasks. The problem is that we have many people whose job is solely doing or operating those tools. So people in research, people in calculation roles, people in routine information processing roles. And we're getting now to the stage where those tasks are being automated to the extent that the job is automated. But it is impossible today, and probably for a long time to come, to automate those very human things: care, compassion, communication, motivation, empowerment of others, and so on. And so what we should be doing is thinking about how do we teach those interpersonal skills, those soft skills, those things that separate high performance from mediocre performance. How do we teach those things? And at the moment, we're not really teaching them at the level of scale that we need to. So we all know that it's possible to teach people to be collaborative, to be creative, to operate as a design, with a kind of a design mindset or growth mindset. These are teachable things, but we don't. We expect collaboration to be the byproduct of project work at university. We'll put them in a team, they'll learn to collaborate. And I think we should be teaching these skills that actually are the fundamentals of what jobs in the future will look like a lot more earnestly.
There's a question about the fact that the macro trends in employment that we've been discussing this morning are really focused on big business. What's your comment about whether the solution or support that is needed for the 45% of employees in the SMB sector?
So that's something where government really has a much bigger role to play. The companies can afford products like Faethm, they can afford the services of the big consulting firms. They can afford to invest in major relationships with people like UTS and the Futures Academy. These things are not accessible for small businesses anywhere near as much as they need to be. And so government fostering a sense of collective amongst SMBs is really important. It is something, unfortunately, that happens much better in other countries outside of Australia. So places like the UK, Germany, Canada, these are countries that we look to see examples of how this works well. I mentioned the Mars Discovery District in Toronto a little bit earlier in the conversation. So just for reference, Mars has got 12,000 SMBs that it supports through from inception through to the initial stages of growth, Series A, Series B, and maturity. Mars is driving a huge amounts of inward investment into the SMB sector across Canada, but particularly in Ontario, and has got global stature as a result of it. We don't have anything like that in this country, and yet Canada and Australia are very similar in terms of population, geography, and so on. So I think we should be investing an awful lot more in some of these kind of umbrella mechanisms that link government policy and government funding to the growth of the SMB sector and to communications out into that sector about how they can tackle some of these sorts of issues.
Michael, thank you so very much. Lindy, thank you so very much. Every time I hear you speak, Michael, I'm reminded that we have such a huge opportunity in front of us, and we should be really focused on the positives and the upsides of what's going to happen in this. And I always make sure that I want to try and get the language, the third renaissance, right? I really want to keep that concept, because we can too busy and too easily focus on the downsides when the upside is so much bigger. So Michael, Lindy, thank you so very much. A fantastic way to kick off this morning.
Thank you guys. Thanks both for having me here.
You're welcome, David. Thank you. Thanks all.
Guys.
Thanks.
To all of our delegates, there's been an incredible conversation happening in the Q&A. Feel free to jump in there. If you go into the Works Up platform, click the details of the session. There's a Q&A tab. You can ask questions. You can upvote other people's questions, and some of them end up on the actually on the live stage, and you might see them come across the bottom there. Okay, we're about to move into our keynote for this morning. So we're going to run a short video to introduce Northeastern University, then I'll come back to introduce the session. It's a great introduction to Northeastern, a university in Boston, Massachusetts, which is a global research university that has a distinct experiential approach to education. They navigate traditional classroom study with opportunities for professional work, research, service, and global learning all intercombined. Drawing on Northeastern's model, this session will focus on the impact of this approach on student employability. And the moderator for today, we're very lucky to have Tim Dodd, the Australian's higher education editor. Tim has over 25 years experience as a journalist covering a wide variety of areas of public policy, economics and politics, foreign policy, including higher education. So I'll hand over to you, Tom, to introduce Kenneth Henderson. Thank you, Tim.
Good morning, David, and good morning, everyone, and great to be here with you. Now, it's going to be really interesting to hear this morning from Kenneth Henderson, because he is the Chancellor of Northeastern University, which has a model which is not very much used in higher education, which is that every student there has an experiential learning experience. So we are going to hear from Kenneth and learn how this had developed at Northeastern, and then go a bit deeper into what that means for education in the future. And before we get started, I should just note that this is a very important conversation for Australia at the moment, as the higher education reforms which are currently in the federal parliament do have incentives for universities to engage in more experiential learning, more work integrated learning. So it's a very interesting thing for us to be hearing about now. Good morning, Kenneth. I know it's not morning there where you are, but thank you for being with us. And please just give us an introduction to Northeastern and how it came to be such a powerhouse in experiential learning.
Well, I'll say good morning. I'll be in your time zone, but as you can see from behind me in Boston, Massachusetts, it's actually nighttime. But I'm absolutely delighted to be here and very much appreciate the ability to share a little bit about Northeastern University. So the university is really unusual, and certainly within the context of North America. It's an experiential learning university, and what that means at its core is learning by doing. So we have classroom instruction, but a signature piece of the university is what we call co-op or cooperative education. And the piece that's really powered the university over the last few decades has been a model where we place students for 6 months in industry and not-for-profit organizations and government and startup companies. So they have a full 6-month experience in that organization, and then they rotate back into the university. Something like 97% of our learners take those opportunities. So almost everyone does one of those. Most students do 2 or 3 of those co-ops. So actually, by the time they leave and they're graduated, they can have up to 18 months of real-world work experience. And what I like to say is that it's not so much just the experience of being in industry or being in a research lab that really matters here. It's the quality of the experience. So we have a dedicated workforce in the university. We've actually built the university, even the calendar, around these 6 months experiences. We've got a history of actually running cooperative education for over 100 years. So we have a really deep network and wide network of, at this point, over 3,000 corporate partners that we work with every year in order to provide these opportunities. So this feedback loop between what is actually happening in the outside world, those learners rotating back into the classroom and interacting with their peers and with faculty, and them doing that on multiple occasions really leads to this very interesting mixture of really what is happening out there now, what's the most exciting thing that's out there now. And as an educator myself, I can tell you it means that you don't get the grass growing below your feet. The students will tell you if you're giving a lecture on separation science, I'm a chemist, and you're talking about technology that's 10 years old, well, if a student has just rotated back from a co-op in separation science and they're using, cutting edge technology, they'll let you know about it. So it means that the faculty really have to be at the bleeding edge all the time of what is out there and all the course material. So it leads to this really interesting, rigorous type of education, really outwardly focused education, which I think is unusual. Maybe something I'll just say about the university to give you a little bit of context. It's around 30,000 learners. It's in downtown Boston. It transformed itself dramatically from being what was basically a commuter school around 30 years ago, and certainly over the last 10 to 20 years into becoming a highly research active university, over $180 million of research funding at the university. And then also one that became extremely selective. So we had over 64,000 applications for about just under 3,000 entry positions for our undergraduate program. And we pull learners from across the planet. Around 18% of our undergraduate population are international students. And that transformation from being really a commuter access school to being really what is an elite, private, large research institution. That was really powered by experiential learning. That was the fuel that pushed the university forward. That's what drove the learners in, because what they saw was a value proposition, right? Because the outcome here is that students get jobs or they get to graduate schools of their choosing. So something like over 90% of our learners are employed after graduation in the area that they have graduated from. So be that theatre, music, or computer science, or civil engineering. So it's an interesting mixture of learning in the real world and learning in the classroom.
Well, when you sit beside Harvard and MIT, it obviously might be hard to make your mark, but clearly you have. But how do you engage employers in this? How do you find enough of the places to put thousands of students every year?
So that's a great question, Tim. So for us, we do have a long history at this. So let me just go back. Back in the day, this was actually the financial model for the university. So what we would do is we would help to find jobs, short-term jobs for students so that they could go learn, they could go earn money, get tuition, and then come back either in day school or even at night school. So we would facilitate that. And, you know, our smart forefathers figured out, hey, wait a second, there's actually something to this. These students are learning something from this. And this is where experiential learning really sort of took off at the university, where it became, if you like, the learning science started to take over. And it was like, how can we use this model to something that's really adding value? So we had a long-term relationships with many companies in order to place students, in order to get positions. But what very quickly happened was that once the employer saw that, hey, wait a second, this is basically a talent acquisition program for us. So what they're doing is, we call this as like a 6-month job interview. So students go out, they work with employers, and then around 50% of our students get job offers from their co-op employers. So the companies see this as a value, not only that they're getting talented young people working, and it's a flexible resource for them, but also that it's a talent acquisition pipeline for them. And then that's a virtuous cycle that's set up, because now what happened over a very short period of time, literally single-digit years, it really rocketed up the quality of student that was applying into the program, but also the quality of placement where our students would go, because in order for companies to compete with one another, you would have to make the positions more and more and more attractive. So Tim, to answer your question, we actually have around, for every one student, we actually have 2 job placements currently available. So we have more jobs available than we have students, we're in a very fortunate position. And it's simply because I think we all realize that we live in a talent economy, and we have very talented students, and companies want students.
Do the employers pay the students for the work that they are carrying out in their experiential placements?
Yeah, that's a great question as well. Yes, so almost all of the placements, these industrial placements or not-for-profits, are paid. There's a small number that are unpaid. Those tend to be more in the not-for-profit world, or if they're international. So we send our students across all continents, including Antarctica. And some of those international ones, because of visa restrictions and work permits, then those are unpaid. We do supply those students usually with some small stipend or fellowship from the university to enable them if they so need it. But the vast majority, and that again covers, I want to emphasize this point, this covers, it's fully comprehensive. This is not just a STEM initiative. This is everything from mathematics to music to history, where we place people with placements which are associated with their area of interest. And the vast majority of them, well above 90%, are paid. And the companies need to do that, otherwise they won't compete for the talent.
Sure. And how do you integrate what students are learning in the placements into what they're learning in the classroom?
Yeah, that's really interesting. That has evolved dramatically over the last decade. So technology is a big piece of this. So we do use humans and technology together. A piece of technology that we use is a self-developed program or app platform that we've developed called Self-Authored Integrated Learning, SAIL. And what this SAIL app does is a reflective learning tool, which is at the core of experiential learning, is actually reflecting on the learning that you're doing in the moment and afterwards in order to really truly learn that material or skill. So the SAIL application is something that enables a learner to do that. So we have 5 attributes, things like wellness or creativity, quantitative analysis, where a student will actually assess their learning. They can have that prescribed. So if you take a course, that will have pre-prescribed learning goals and outcomes, which will then be fed into this app. But it can also be a student who is on co-op, or if they are captain of the soccer team, I should say football. If they're taking an art class or whatever it may be outside of the curriculum, they can actually then assign themselves attributes in terms of, is this a global experience? Is this something that's associated with wellness? And basically what they do is they're building up an entire picture of their learning portfolio, sort of like a 360 view of where their strengths are and also other areas they need to build out. So part of the co-op uses this reflective learning tool. I'm happy to talk about that in more detail. It's got other components to it. And then another piece is that we work with humans. So we actually have what we call co-op faculty members, and they work with the student before they go on placement, and also during when they're on placement, and then when they return from that experience, in order that they're continually reflecting on that experience. So it's not turn up, do your 9 to 5, come home, you're getting paid a check and you're done. It's constantly pushing, what are you learning? How can you learn more? How much can you get out of this experience? And it really is a partnership between the educators, the university, and the company. So we work together to ensure that this is a learning environment for the student. It's not just work for the sake of, a company getting some product out the door. It really has to be an engaging learning experience.
You're working with the technology which Practera has in this area, aren't you, as well? So that's an Australian connection for you.
Yeah, so Practera, we're actually investors in Practera, right, and we're very proud of that. And I know they're sponsors of this conference and very happy with that. And you may ask yourself, what's an American university doing, investing in an Australian EdTech? And it comes down to this. Practera really matches really perfectly what we do as an educational organisation. In fact, even in the short time that we've engaged with Practera, we've already launched what I would say is sort of matches our lifelong learning goal as an institution. They've worked over the summer to engage students, high school students in the Boston region in order to do internships. And you can imagine this has been a challenging summer for students to find that type of work possibility. Practera enabled that for us to do that remotely. They have also helped us to carry out an award with the National Science Foundation, where it's called iUse, where we work with Practera in order to enable experiential learning with other state schools, or state schools where are private, and community colleges to enable learning design in classrooms. And then I would say not most excitingly, but maybe most excitingly to me, is It's a platform that enables learning in the flow of work for our corporate learners. And that's a population that we're really excited about working with. And in this way, we're working with Practera in order that employees in companies in their daily work can basically be credited and in a mentored, curated environment in order for those skills and experiences to go towards either a stackable certificate or a degree, some learning outcome. And Practera is a fantastic platform for that. So this is the beginning of what we think is going to be a really exciting collaboration that we just launched. It might have been about a year ago, just about now. So that's an EdTech company that we very much like investing in and see a great future for moving forward.
Let's have a look at a few of the questions that are coming up on the chat. There is one here that says, are there certain fields of interest that you can see that students lean towards or prefer in experiential learning?
You know, that's really interesting. And I would say I'm surprised. I'm a chemist, as said, by training. And I would have bet that students would be leaning more towards the STEM disciplines than I would have expected. So what we are finding is that students, if they have the opportunity to combine skills together or areas of interest together, they flock towards that. So the humanities, social sciences, if they're on their own, just as a traditional major, they're not doing so well. Similarly, if it's design on its own or art on its own, not so well. What we're finding that's becoming a huge growth area are what we call combined majors. So these are not dual majors where you take 2 degrees in parallel. They're actually combined majors. So we take a component of one major, a component of a second major, integration courses in between the 2 majors. Those have become huge growth areas for us. So we now have over 160 of those that we've developed over the last 5 or 6 years. And these combine areas such as, say, psychology and marketing, or music and mathematics, or computer science and physics. So these have become extremely popular. So they didn't exist 7, 8 years ago. And now we're finding that from our incoming class, around about 20 to 25% of the incoming class are actually choosing to go into these combined majors. And a big winner in those are the social sciences and humanities. Okay. So students are interested in those. So it's interesting. They're very interested in those areas. And then we're also seeing that from our corporate partners that, just as your previous speaker, Michael, talked about, these areas of creativity, entrepreneurship, innovation, these are areas that are intrinsically human. And those are areas that if you combine those with technical skills and the more traditional STEM disciplines, that's a powerful combination.
Let's look at some more questions on the chat. There is one here that says, look, do students get some sort of badge from their placements which they can use in their portfolio? And also, are they paying for the placement, even though they're being paid? Is there a cost that is incurred either by them or by you as the university? And are they awarded any credit for the placement?
Yeah, so in terms of cost, they don't pay. This is something, they're still full-time students, so they have access to university facilities, the library, etc. during that period of time. They are all over the world, so many in Massachusetts, but again, everywhere. So they don't pay anything during that period of time. They don't pay the university tuition. Maybe that's the easiest way of putting it. There's no tuition payment during that period of time. They get paid by the company. Many students are actually earning significant amounts of money during that period of time, and they use that to offset tuition moving forward. So they don't pay. It's not something that we it's a service that we provide for the students, which again is something that attracts the student through the door in the first place. In terms of credit, that's actually a really interesting question. So at present, we don't credit the students for co-op. That's something we're taking a really close look at, because, I'll just be frank, we're a learning organisation. We are working in the B2B space in a significant way. Practera is a great partner for us in that space. So why would we not give students credit for learning while they're actually out in the working world, as long as it's a curated and mentored experience with appropriate learning goals? So that's actually one of the projects they're working on now. Is to how do we best do this in order to give credit for placements during that period of time. So that's probably something we're moving towards. We don't currently do it.
And here's another query off the chat. Does the fact that students are spending time on the experiential learning part of it make the degree longer?
Yeah, so that's a good question. It can do, it doesn't have to. So as I mentioned earlier on, we actually build our entire calendar around these placements. So they're 6 months long, and they basically run from January until July, and then July into June, and then July into December. What we do is that we have 2 summer terms of 6 weeks. And those summer terms are very heavily populated with classes, much more than you would see in a university in North America. And that's because many of our students, what they will do is they will use those 6-week blocks in order to take a couple more classes in order to stay on track for graduation, if they want to. So that's an important feature. The other feature is that we do allow students to take coursework if they are on co-op. So that again is part of the platform will allow digital remote education. And if they want to do that, that again keeps their credit count up. So if they want to, they can absolutely graduate in a regular clock. The other thing that we do is, which is part of the sort of philosophy, is we actually accept significant amount of prior work for students coming into the university. And that again sort of accelerates them towards courses and upper level courses that are more interesting to them, but also cuts down on the credit count that they need to do while they're actually in the university.
Here's one more question. Is this something like an apprenticeship model? Are we rebuilding something here which used to exist everywhere once?
That is really, that's a very interesting question. So it's definitely, I would say, I'd put it in the traditional terms. In the traditional terms, it is this sort of 6-month interview. And of course, it's a joint interview. The student, the learner, is interviewing the company, as well as the company is interviewing the student. So the apprenticeship model is a little more, you are working with this company until you get your degree or certificate. That said, we're actually launching an apprenticeship program this fall in the UK. So we do have campuses, multiple campuses in the US, and also 2 in Canada, one in Vancouver, one in Toronto. We have campuses in North America, in Charlotte, in Seattle, San Francisco, Silicon Valley, and also in a couple of other places in North America. And then we have a campus in the UK. It's a university that we actually acquired. And in the UK, we actually have a full-blown apprenticeship model. So in that case, we actually have learners who are undergraduates, usually high school leavers, who are going in and working with a company. And then we're partnering with a company called ServiceNow, which is a technical company, digital technology company. And we're providing remote learning, some hybrid learning for those students in order that they can progress towards actually all the way up to master's degrees. So we actually are engaged in what would be, I would say it's a non-traditional apprenticeship program, but we're engaged in that as well. We do think apprenticeships, and if you like, let's call it co-op to work programs, that's probably part of the future. So where there's a guarantee for the learner to actually be placed in a company at the end of that company, so they may pay some amount of tuition for that learner, and then they go and rotate into the company at the end of that period of time. We think that that's another model that we are playing with right now. So we think that's probably part of the future.
Yeah, it's interesting that you are spreading this model into other locations. That builds into my next question, which is that you're in the Boston area. There's a lot of high-tech firms there, a lot of startups. It's probably relatively easy to find placements for students who are working in new technology areas and in the sort of future work of the 21st century. But how easy would it be to spread this model nationwide, where the nature into places where the nature of work is still very different?
So that's actually a really good question as well. So let me give you an example. So we just opened a campus in Portland, Maine, not Portland, Oregon. So Portland, Maine is around 2 hours north of where Boston is right now. It's a relatively small town. Maine is, although it's a large state, it's actually very lightly populated. Its economy has been mainly tourism, fishing. So very agricultural type of economy. We received a significant gift from a philanthropist for $100 million, David Rue, actually earlier on this year. And the idea here, the concept is to build basically a new economy in, let's say, developing regions, which Maine would fit into that category. And the idea here is really to have a combination of assets together that could really drive forward an economy of a region. So it's an economic development sort of initiative. And in that, we've got a university which has research, it has learning. We're partnering with other universities in the region as well, so other stakeholders there in education, but also state and local government, the city government, as well as venture, in order to help to build startup culture there as well. And the key element, the sort of driver behind all of this, is what we term experiential AI, which is really human in the loop, applications-based artificial intelligence, so that we have a research focus on that, but we've also got a learning focus on AI, and especially in the life sciences as a sort of dual focus. And the idea there is to actually bring in companies that are existing around that focus, and then also attract other companies or organizations into that region. So far, that's going really well. We have a dozen companies that are our founding partners, and we already have our first cohort of learners that are going to be small. Initially, it'll be around 50 learners or so. But that's already off to like a very strong start. So I think the moral of the story here is that if you bring the right tools in the right areas to a location, then I think you're going to bring the right talent around that. So that includes the companies.
And you are saying that part of the reason for the Real Institute is to build a new type of job in that area of Maine?
That's exactly right. So the model there is actually, it's even more of a departure for us. The way this is designed is that we have a dozen, in this case, we have a dozen founding corporate partners, and they truly sit down with us at the beginning in order to design the learning programs. So, and I really mean that. It's not the traditional university goes out and says, here's what we think is a great product, say yes. It is, what do you guys truly need? What's your gap? What is it you need in terms of skill development or leadership or creative thinking? What is it that you actually need? And we sit and work with those partners and then design really on a personal level what the program would be that would make the best sense for them. So it really is personalized education, but it's done with the company at the seat at the table at the very beginning. And then, of course, there's a partnership there with them in terms of, we're looking for them to be the supplier of the talent that we would then help develop. So that's a step beyond what we've done in the past to really ensure that we're providing the companies with the talent and upskilling that they want.
Well, that's a very interesting thing you're attempting there, because, and it's got broader implications, because as we all know, there's a political divide in the US, which partly is driven by the types of jobs available in the area. In the Midwest, you're not going to find many high technology jobs. So is this a way of inserting elements of the new economy into areas which don't have that now and which suffer high unemployment and lack of opportunity?
So, Tim, you're exactly on point. The concern that our benefactor in this particular enterprise, Dave Rue, has is that we're defaulting into super cities. So, the Bay Area in the United States, it's the Bay Area, it's Boston, it's New York, it's Seattle, it's maybe Austin, Texas, and there's a few more, where there's these really high-paying, high-powered jobs, and then the rest of the economy is getting left behind, and the rest of the population, if you're not involved, get left behind. And that's not seen as sustainable. So going back to your previous speaker in terms of renaissance or revolution, those renaissances were relatively broadly based. And a concern here is that you could really increase the divide unless you spread the areas, the physical locations where this talent resides. So the idea behind this is and we're only part of this, we're not the solution, but it has to be a social compact with all these other components. Can we as part of this be a solution to actually helping to drive economies in areas that need that economic stimulus? So you're exactly on point.
Thanks, Kenneth. Now, we are getting towards the end of our time, but there's an interesting issue which is coming up on the chat. So, and the point being made there is that, is there a way of funding education of the type that you are doing through income share, where a student can pay less, but of course, once they've graduated, well then the employer invests in the education and then gets the benefit.
Yeah, so so let's just state the obvious here. The model in the United States for education is very expensive, especially the residential model. We are, like many institutions, looking at various different mechanisms in order to fund the education for students moving forward. So income share agreements is certainly one of those potential tools that are very interesting. So either by, and it's interesting your question had asked that, either by the individual doing an income share agreement and basically deferring the cost till later in life when they have the means to pay. It could be a percentage of their future salary. Some places have done. So that's been tested out a little bit in the United States. And then the other one that you raised, which I think is really intriguing, is having the employer pay. We've not yet done that. As I say, the area that we're starting to explore more is, maybe it's similar. It's not so much an income share agreement. It really is, if you like, a sort of hybrid model of apprenticeship. This is the co-op to job model. So that's where an employer would actually pay the tuition during some period of time in order for that learner then to rotate into the company. But I think the answer to many of these questions is we're going to be using many of these models, and we're going to personalize that again to the learner. What makes sense to them? What makes sense to the company? The way we've done this in the past is likely not going to continue into the future.
Okay. Well, speaking about the future, let's look at the future. and the way that education will look, do you think that you will always be offering the standard 3 or 4 year degree, or are you looking at different models of education which might have shorter courses, might be more continuous, might be stackable?
Yeah, no question. So just like Michael in the previous session, I think he's 100% correct. So we're already doing that. So we're unbundling all of our programs, which include undergraduate programs. And we just released this semester our first fully online undergraduate first semester, our full first semester which is comprehensive, so it covers all majors. We just released that. That's designed to be unbundled and stackable and reusable. We have more experience in that in the graduate degree space, where again, everything that we're doing is building basically a portfolio of content that can be reused. And what we're finding is that, and we hear this from companies, we hear this from adult learners, that they need what they need and no more, and they need it when they want it, and they need it in a convenient way. So we're absolutely trying to serve that need. So the traditional university, which is, look after your 18 to 22-year-olds and do 4 years of degree, and then you send them on their merry way, those days are very quickly coming to an end. I believe that if higher education doesn't transform to be really, truly integrated lifelong learning organizations, then we're not fulfilling our mission. If companies are providing education to employees, then that's not their skill set. That's not their core business. It's the core business of educators. We're not fulfilling our mission. So that's something that we're very interested in through a variety of means, ensuring that we have this lifelong engagement. And that's going to be, again, has to be in an unbundled but stackable format. So that's something that we're actively engaged in right now.
Just before we wind up, let's go back to the chat, to the question which has come up there about the Rue Institute in Portland. Were there any surveys that were conducted to determine demographic needs of Portland in designing the experiential programs there?
Yeah, absolutely. So this was truly a social compact. It was interesting because we've gone to other places such as I say, San Francisco and Toronto and Vancouver, other cities, and there we've really worked hard to try and integrate into a system. And usually, that's taken some force of will. In Portland, Maine, we were welcomed with open arms. It was seen that there is a need for a high quality research and education at the master's level and above within that system. And therefore, there was a compact that was made between the state, the city, as say, venture. And part of that was really looking at where is this, where is Portland best positioned to make an impact? So I mentioned life sciences as an example, so the experiential AI in life sciences. So the life sciences piece comes basically from, that's obviously, again, next generation technology, it's high paying jobs, but it's 90 minutes to 2 hours away from Boston. And Boston's one of the biggest biotech centers, on the planet. So that is a corridor between Boston up to Portland, Maine, which is completely doable. So just like it's much, much smaller than the Bay Area, in terms of distance, a lot easier to compute as well. So that's why life sciences was chosen as an area. So that was done through not only our work, but also the work of the state and economic development boards there within Portland.
Yeah. Now, are you getting a lot of interest from other universities in your model? Are they asking you questions about it? And do you have the feeling that anyone else is going to adopt it?
Yeah, there's no question. There's no question that, the value proposition to learners is really clear. They come in, they get really high quality experiences in the outside world, enabled by technology. they go on and get great placements, whether it be in industry or going on to PhD in graduate school, medical school, whatever it may be. So we constantly have a stream of universities, not just in North America, but across the world, coming to see what is it we do and how do we do it. And we're happy to share all of that. There's nothing proprietary here apart from the tools that we build. But the model is something that we're happy to share. So for us, it is what we are doing now in terms of cooperative education is not going to be enough moving forward. So we're happy to share, we're happy for others to use that type of model of education and experiential education. But really what we want to be in the game of is what's coming next. So always to add that extra level of value. So one of the areas that we're looking at now is really combining this lifelong work, career design, learning experience, so that if you like, we evolve into, think of it as a club, a lifelong club that you have a membership of and that you come back constantly to as your needs evolve and change. So that's a piece that we're really excited by, is to think about career placement used to be something you would do at the end of your undergraduate degree, and then you would never talk to a career counsellor again. The alumni group from your university would be something you would rotate into, and that would be a social organisation. We are now looking at ways, including using technology, in order to actually combine these together so that career design, that your cooperative learning experience and your alumni engagement is actually a single thing. It's like a lifelong learning club. So it's these types of areas to move into that we hope will keep the university sort of differentiated and pushing ahead, and not sitting back and saying, oh, we've somehow figured this out, because we haven't. The world changes constantly.
Well, thank you, Kenneth. We are out of our assigned time, but there's a lot of thought-provoking ideas there to chew over and to look at how they can be applied in higher education in Australia. So thank you very much indeed.
Well, thank you very much, Tim. I really appreciate it, and have a great rest of the conference.
Thanks.
Sorry, David, we don't seem to have your audio. If you want to check your audio.
There we go. I was muted whilst I was in the background. Sorry. Thank you very much, Kenneth. Great to have you. And Tim, thank you so very much. It's fantastic to hear 97% of students completing real-world projects within their degree. And this seems like a great extension of the work integrated learning programs that we see here in Australia. So thank you for this morning and this evening, Ken, and a huge benefit of the virtual world that we're working in today is that you can actually come and be in our conference without having to cross the international date line and lose a day. So that's the one big benefit that we can see about this current environment. Tim, thank you so much for leading the conversation, and we truly appreciate the support for across the Australian EdTech sector from the Australian newspaper. Thanks very much, guys.
Thank you. Thanks.
To all our delegates, we're actually going to take a 15-minute break now. And during the break, if you hang around, you'll be able to see videos from leading Australian EdTech companies who are EduGrowth members and are doing fantastic things in driving education and innovation agenda across Australia and globally. Then when we come back, our next session will actually start to take the focus of experiential learning in Boston, and we'll start putting it within the Australian context. I'd like to acknowledge in this video package, I'd like to acknowledge ClickView. They're an EduGrowth strategic partner, and they're actually going to be the first video that you'll see. So we'll see you back here at 10:30. Thanks very much.
Hi, my name is Nikki Bonus. I'm the CEO and founder of Life Skills Go. First and foremost, I want to say thank you to all our educators and principals who are doing an incredible job during this lockdown period. I wanted to talk to you today about the problem that we're facing for our students. How do we remotely support students' social, emotional and physical learning? Life Skills Go is an online interactive learning platform that can be delivered remotely, yet also allowing your teachers the opportunity to not only be able to see in real time how your students are, but also their understanding. We capture the curriculum alignment, the outcomes and the reporting on each and every class, therefore seamlessly allowing you to move from a remote environment back to a classroom environment. Like everything that we do, it's all curriculum-based, evidence-based, science-backed, and it's made to be fun, not only engaging for the students, but also allowing them to enjoy the experience. I can talk to you about how good I think the platform is, but I'd love to share with you a beautiful clip from Eric Alvers from Oakley South. Oakley South implemented Life Skills Go during the previous lockdown. They successfully transitioned back into a classroom environment with the platform and have now transferred back again to remote learning.
If you really want to enhance the well-being of your students, it's a must that you actually implement Life Skills Go platform at your school.
Our special offer for you today is a 30-day trial. We know that you're going to love it. So rather than having to worry about what you're going to do for the rest of the year and next year, if you sign up for 2021, we will give you the rest of the year for free. We'd love to support not only your students, your teachers and your families as we all navigate together through this period of time.
Gloria needs to prepare an online class for Monday. She only has an hour. How can OB3 speed this process up for her? She already has some content.
A Word doc from last year's course is a good start. Transferring into OB3 is a snap. She checks everything came in correctly, clean up things along the way using OB3's editing features.
An image would be nice for the start. And there's a video and a quote to add.
couple of PowerPoint slides have useful content. There's a diagram. And a table.
She would like to get her students involved through discussions. Finally, there's a course feedback form.
OB3, beautiful study for lifelong learning. Engage students, empower teachers.
Welcome back, everyone. Thank you for being here in our next session. Let me begin by thanking the companies that provided videos, innovative EdTech companies who gave us an introduction to their platforms. We began with ClickView, we saw Open Learning, Life Skills Go, OB3, and Education Perfect. And these are just some of the innovative Australian education technology businesses that are driving an agenda to change education as we imagine it in a digital borderless world. Let's move to our next session where we can take the conversation about experiential learning from the global context where we have Northeastern, and we can start to put it within the Australian context and focus on the innovation that's being driven here. I'm going to begin by introducing Beau Lesse. He has a passion for building skills, innovation and collaboration across sector to deliver positive outcome. He co-founded and is the co-CEO of Practera along with Wes Sonorak and Susie. I can't think of Susie's name right off the top of my head, though.
Susie Watson.
Susie Watson, that's it. A fast-growing experiential learning technology company helping people build real-world skills needed for the jobs of tomorrow. I'll hand you over to Beau. Thanks, Beau.
Thanks so much, David. I'm really excited to be discussing this theme and topic, which is very close to our heart at Practera. It really does follow on from the discussion that's been had this morning, which has been really inspiring, initiated by Michael from Faethm, who finished up by talking about the need to bridge the gap to educating more systematic human skills for the jobs of tomorrow. It was great to hear from Kenneth Henderson talking about experiential learning at the core of the university experience from the Northeastern University perspective in the US. I'm delighted to be joined by Dino Willox. Dino is a key thought leader of this theme in Australian higher education. They are the Director of Student Employability at the University of Queensland. Dino's work spans professional, academic and the extracurricular spaces, and they take a multidimensional approach to embedding employability across the university. Dino is also, in their spare time, chair of the Employability Group and member of the Student Experience and Global Mobility Groups for U21, a global network of research-intensive universities. So welcome, Dino.
Hello. I am not in my living room, as you may be able to gather. I'm currently in a space that is being prepped for the team to come back in. So half of our team are on campus and the other half are coming back in, and we're hopefully going to be here working with students on campus very shortly.
Fantastic. I'm definitely in my living room.
I just didn't want people to think this was my decor.
Dino, just to kick off, I wonder if you wouldn't mind telling us a little bit about your background and how you've come to this wonderful role.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I originally began life in the UK, as you may be able to tell from my accent, but I actually grew up in Hong Kong, and then I worked in Wales in the UK and Scotland before coming to Australia. So I've moved around a bit, which gives you a kind of perspective on what you learn through those global experiences in those global places and spaces and different ways of thinking and being. And that certainly drove my understanding of how learning works. And I'm really passionate about education holistically, and specifically about increasing access to education for people who might not necessarily have thought of higher education or further education, or pushing themselves and challenging themselves. So for me, it is about trying to make people aware of the holistic nature of education and the fact that development and experiential learning is really not only difficult, but it is accessible, and it is something that everybody actually already does. They just might not be aware of it. That's a little bit about me. And I suppose in terms of how I came to be here, Director of Student Employability, as I say to people, you can only really trace any kind of career progression backwards. And I can make links back to what I did, but pretty much every one of my decisions in terms of where I wanted to work next was based on where I physically wanted to live.
Fantastic, thank you. We're talking about experiential learning, a topic I know you are very, very passionate about. Could you help us understand what we mean by experiential learning? What is experiential learning? And I'll borrow one of the questions from the previous thread. Is it simply a weasel term for avoiding talking about jobs?
Well, I think the comment from the earlier thing was about whether employability was a weasel term, which we can come back to, and the link or not potentially between employability and jobs is something we can definitely talk about. But experiential learning is about recognizing that learning is not just theoretical. It's not just the nuts and bolts of the maths or the knowledge piece in terms of what I know. It's about what I've done and how that doing has actually developed my understanding of what I'm capable of, what I'm capable of doing in the future. And it's also about recognizing the breadth and depth of the places and spaces from which you can learn. So when I talk about lived experience as well as experiential learning, lived experience is a term that's very often used within the disability sector in terms of the experience that you have had determining what you are capable of doing and able to do within a context. And experiential learning is about saying your experience, your enactment of that experience, your lived experience has value. What you need to be able to do is reflect on that experience and be able to identify the value and unlock it and be able to then articulate it in a different space and place. So a lot of times people talk about employability skills. Now, a skill is like, you can do this thing now. A capability is something that you have the potential to be able to do. And experiential learning really makes the link between those two things. You might have experience of a skill that you have learned how to do a thing. But when you reflect on that experience and you actually think through the value of that experience, you then are able to develop more from that, develop more capabilities, develop more future potential And I think that's what it is for me as experiential learning. And just as an example, in terms of that holistic nature of that, I spent 12 years as an international hockey umpire. And it's from those experiences in particular that I learned about resilience, about management, about self-discipline, about leadership, and really about communicating in high pressure environments very quickly and very often in a language that was not shared. So the experiential learning that I gained from being an international hockey umpire allowed me to become a better leader in a work environment, and I couldn't have got that from a textbook. And I think that's the difference. I mean, I studied philosophy, and that was great fun, and I loved it, and I know that you loved it too. Not my studies, but yours. And that definitely developed in me critical thinking capabilities that I definitely use now. But that's only part of the process. That critical thinking has to be applied in a place and a space, and those places and spaces that you learn how to enact that knowledge is different. And so for me, experiential learning is, number one, about thinking about things holistically. Number two, about recognizing there is value in all experiences that you have, whether they are curricular, co-curricular, extracurricular. But you have to be able to unlock that value, be able to identify it, unlock it, and articulate it. So it's part of a process for me.
And why is this, from an adult learning perspective, why is this a distinctive type of learning that's different from classroom teaching and learning? Could you unpack that for us?
Well, this is just my opinion. I'm not an educational leader. You know, I think a lot. I was very pleased that you called me a thought leader. That's delightful. But educationally, you know, if you think about as you're learning through school, you get told things. It's a very didactic process. You are told things, you learn things, you regurgitate them, and you go, I've learned the knowledge, I've learned the thing. When you're thinking in an adult learning space, really it is about saying, how has your experience and the things that you have done and seen and the places and spaces where you have applied that knowledge, how has that been different? How has that changed? And so it becomes more of a kind of adult learning space because you are at the same level. It's not a didactic learner and teacher process. It's more of a self-reflective, holistic, engaged process, which is more difficult, really, because you're not just saying, I have one answer. You're saying, I've had this experience and therefore I need to think through what does that mean and actually translate that into different places and spaces. Does that answer the question? I'm not sure it does.
Certainly does. And there's only, of course, one answer. So thank you for that opinion. Why do you think this type of learning is becoming more important?
Well, I think going back to the world of work is changing. I mean, it has always changed and it is always changing, but especially with, advances in artificial intelligence and machine learning and robotics and the way that things are changing, you can't just learn a thing and that's the thing that you do. So learning a skill and going, that's the thing that I do. It's not really viable anymore. I'm not ever sure that it was viable because really you should be thinking innovatively and creatively all the time, but especially now with things moving so fast. And as we've seen with COVID, the need to change what you do and how you do it is so important now. It's imperative. And actually one of the best ways of being able to do that is to have had an experience that challenges you and challenges your way of thinking about how things happen and how things must do. I remember in every organisation I've worked in, when I've gone into a team, they've always said, well, that's how we've always done it. And I used to ban that phrase because you can't ever say, well, that's how we've always done it, so that's how we're going to do it, because that's kind of the definition of stupidity. Oh, that sounds terrible. But I think it was Einstein who said that. Anyhow, the point for me is things are changing all the time and your experience will inform what you do next. And so you have to not say the book tells me this or the manual tells me this. You have to say, I've got that bit of knowledge. Now I'll apply it here. And in this experience, this did or didn't work, and so I'm going to change it. So it's that necessary flexibility, that necessary response to situations, that necessary self-reflection that actually is core. And experiential learning teaches you that, and that then becomes, it's limitless.
And now moving on to the Australian university context and your role, which is to embed this type of learning. How do Australian universities engage students and external partners, particularly employers, in experiential learning?
Well, the starting point is there's not one size fits all. In every university, every region, every industry has a different demographic, a different kind of configuration. And I think the starting point is that it's not one size fits all, but you also have to think that there's a core element there. So how do we embed that core element, and how do we embed that self-reflection and the recognition of a holistic approach to education? I mean, in UQ, we have 6 faculties, 1 university, and we're catering for about 53,000 students. And now we're catering for them almost exclusively virtually. At the moment, we're coming back onto campus and we're doing some things virtually, some things face-to-face. So in all of that, you've got to think, how do we get an essence of self-reflection and learning as the core? And we have a framework that we can talk about another time that's not that exciting. Well, I think it's exciting. But in terms of the examples of how we get people to do that, it's within the curriculum. So there will be academics who are saying, okay, I'm going to give you some information and some ideas, and I'm going to get you to work on a project, and I want you to feedback on how that project worked. They can do that in partnership with industry, and we actually work very closely with Practera, and we actually had the student success program that we ran this year. So in completely virtually, we ran this for international students who were coming into semester 1. So again, they were still in China, they were still in India, they were still in the UK, they were still in Canada, and we were able to engage them in virtual internships through Practera that allowed them to get a sample of what it would be like to put this in the real world. So it's about really giving them some knowledge, some theory, and going, here's a way of doing it practically. And within UQ, we have a number of different options that are run centrally. There are a number that are run within faculties as well, but we have a summer and winter research program that allows students to try out research. It's almost like a research internship, so they can work with all of our researchers who are doing amazing things at the moment, absolutely amazing. And we have student-staff partnerships where we get students and staff together to go, okay, what's an issue that we've got, and how do we find a solution to this? So again, it's embedding that experiential learning at the core and saying, let's bring everyone together virtually, and how do we actually work on this issue? We've got community engagement programs that's run out of one of the faculties, the business economics and law faculty. We have mentoring across the university. So again, it's an experience from which students can learn, and we frame those things so that at the start we say, here's what you can do, this is the thing that you're going to do, and we then bookend it by saying, okay, what did you learn through that? How did you find value in that? We obviously have a massive suite of entrepreneurial opportunities. So Ventures allows people to, again, try out what's the ideation process, and how do you articulate that into a business context, and how do you get some connections with the entrepreneurial ecosystem that will help you take that forward. So again, it's all about taking part and having a go and kind of seeing how that works and allowing people within a safe environment to kind of fail. I mean, if you think about entrepreneurship, they reckon that there are 7 failed businesses before your one succeeds. And I'm sure Practera is your 8th or 9th. It's very successful.
4, but there you go.
Of course, not well. You're doing very well then. But again, the other thing that we do is we provide something that pulls all these things together. So we have the Employability Award, which basically says, okay, we'll look at all of your learning, curricular, extracurricular, co-curricular, and we'll help you bring that together and identify the value that all of that has had for you, and enable you to really think through that and articulate it. So that provides a kind of a catch-all for all students, and it's very simple and very accessible, but it allows people to personalize their learning and say, this is what I did and this is what I learned from that. So that's kind of what we do. It's not a one-size-fits-all, and even within UQ, it's not one-size-fits-all. We can't do that. And working with partners, you will work with partners that you have cognate interests in. And again, we have research partners as well as partners that we work with for work integrated learning, a whole range of engagements. And we have like a menu of ways that we can engage with industry, because there's so many, and there's so many different ways. I think we're going to pick up on the complexities of that later.
Indeed. And you've got the challenge of organising this diverse array of experiential learning programs in a structured and systematic way for 53,000 students. So it's really interesting to get an insight into how that looks when you're looking institution-wide rather than program by program. Given that, how do you see the priority and importance, Dino, of experiential learning and these types of programs changing for Australian universities? How has it changed over recent years? What's the zeitgeist now, and how does this look for you into the future?
Well, and it's interesting as well, coming from the UK, so I worked in the Welsh education sector, which is different to the Scottish education sector, so and over here. And they had very different approaches and very different, so I experienced the education in Wales as well as working in Wales, and then in Scotland and now here. I think that my experience of Australia, and I preface that by saying it's just my experience, is that there was an assumption that experiential learning kind of just happened, or it wasn't necessary because as long as you had the book learning, you were okay. And again, this comes back to that idea of, the globalization of higher education. It used to be only 10% of the population that went to university. Now it's 40% or more. And so book learning is no longer sufficient. And we now recognize that. Now, from my experience previously, I recognised that all the way through my studies. I was first in family to go to university. I worked whilst I was studying. I was involved in student politics. I was involved in sport, all of this stuff. And I recognised the learning from all of that. But some of my peers around me were like, if I get, the top grades, then I'm right. I'm going to be set. And certainly now the top grades, I can get shot for saying this, but my experience in talking to my colleagues in industry, the top grades don't mean anything. You've got to be able to demonstrate your value. And that really means saying, I've had this experience and I've learned from it. And so I can come to you with that experiential learning, with that book knowledge and with that theory and with that understanding of how things work, but I can apply it. And here's an example of how I applied it in a different place or space. So it is now explicit that people need to be able to do that. And I think the lazy equation of a degree to being employable is no longer the case, which I'm personally very pleased about. A degree is, the way that I phrase it, a degree is necessary but not sufficient. It tells you that you have the book knowledge to be able to work in, so say you're going to work in bridge engineering. You know how to make a bridge that won't fall down. But you've got to have worked in a multidisciplinary team who are collaborating across countries and borders and stuff, and you've got to be able to demonstrate that you know how to do that. And so if you don't have the experiential learning, how do you demonstrate to an employer that you can do that? That's the thing for me. That's why it's critical. And I do think that there is a need to push back about the difference between education and getting a job. I think the point I did make a note of the point that you said earlier. Somebody had said, is employability a weasel metric that avoids accountability for the tangible outcome of graduate employment? That was the question, which I think is a brilliant question. Because my question back to that is, well, who is actually accountable for employment? Who is accountable for graduate employment? Because actually what's happened this year is the job market has massively disrupted. So is that the university's role? It's a bit like saying, who is responsible for the economy? We all are, and we all play a role, and we all have a part to play in that. But you can't say, well, universities are responsible for employment on their own. They are responsible for educating people, and they're responsible for enabling people to understand what employability is, the ability to be employed, the ability to add value, the ability to transfer value into a different place or space. That's about an ability. But a job doesn't necessarily determine your ability or demonstrate your ability. I have worked with people in the past who have jobs that I do not understand how they got that. They're not employable. How did they get that job? But I also know people who are eminently employable, but the job's just not there. And there's a lot of those people around at the moment. So we need to decouple this idea of ability from job. We need to decouple this idea of education equals job. And we need to actually talk realistically about how we all contribute to the economy and to the furtherance of the community and how these things are intertwined. But again, that doesn't give you a nice, easy KPI and a number. And that's what a lot of people would like.
Yeah, and it's very resonant with one of the comments in the thread. It is not just about learning by doing. It's not a passive learning thing. It's about the reflection on that experience. It's about transformed action. Following that learning is about new capability. It's about new accountability for the learner as well to translate those new capabilities and skills. What do you see as the drivers and needs for technology in this space to achieve this aspiration of universities to deliver this type of education more systematically? Where are the key issues and opportunities for EdTech?
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult. I mean, straight away, I'm thinking of, well, we've got to be flexible and adaptable. But, in the EdTech space, all of that stuff is happening. One of the thoughts that I did have was decisions need to be data-driven. They need to be based on evidence and information. And actually, EdTech can play a really important role there in being able to capture and passively harvest data that can give us better information about what's working and what's not. And one of the things that I often struggle with in large organizations like UQ is you have multiple systems that don't necessarily talk to each other, and cutting through that and getting to the information that will help you make sensible, good and impactful decisions is something really important. And I also think that as a notion and EdTech being able to enable and make accessible learning is something that really needs to be at the core of a university. the whole point for me of education is it is the way out of poverty. It is the way to improve society. And so if we only allow a certain limited number of people to access that, we're limiting society and we're limiting what we can do as a species. So EdTech has a really important role to play, I think, in making education accessible and providing data that can push us towards greater innovations and greater creativity. And you can see that now in things like short form credentials and badging, where EdTech is saying, well, we don't just want a degree certificate. That doesn't really tell us everything. We need to actually understand what you've been able to do and show us things in more flexible, agile, real time spaces. And I think that's really where EdTech has a really important role to play for me.
And I mean, it's wonderful to think in those terms. I mean, as an EdTech community, we're all about the future of human potential. We're all about the future of unlocking and democratizing access to these types of opportunities. So it's wonderful to be on that journey together. And with that spirit, what do EdTech companies, some of which are in our audience today, need to consider from your perspective in working with universities on these areas in experiential learning and employability?
Yeah, I think that the single most difficult thing from an EdTech perspective is who the hell do you talk to in a university? We are a massive institution. We're like, I said 53,000 students, 6 faculties, I think 5 research institutes. We're across umpteen different campuses. The most difficult thing is getting to the right person to talk to. And what we try and do at UQ is, so I've got the title of Director of Student Employability. I get the most random inquiries, which is fabulous because I get them and go, okay, what do you want to do and how do you want to do it and who do I need to get you in contact with? And I spend most of my time connecting people across the institution. Every institution is different. Getting to the right person at the right time with the right pitch and the right product is incredibly difficult. And that's why, the relationship that you and I have developed over time means that I can connect you with people and you can also connect me with people. And those networks are invaluable. So from an EdTech perspective, anybody out there who goes, I'm trying to get connected with somebody in any institution, if you want to give me a call, I can probably put you in touch with somebody. Because again, the thing for me is we are not in competition with each other. As far as I'm concerned, education is a social and moral good. And I want to get as many people into education as possible, and I will do everything that I can to do that. And the networks that I have around universities, I'm happy to give over to EdTech to get this move forward. Because, if we start being competitive in this space, and I know this might sound weird because obviously you're a company and you've got to make money. I work for a university. I just want to educate people. And I know you feel that too, and there's a tension for me there. But who is the right person in the organisation for what you want to achieve, and how do you pitch that, and how do the decision-making structures work in that institution? That's the most complicated thing.
Thanks, Dino. I'm just going to pick a couple of questions from the thread. Could you please?
I'm glad you're reading that. I can't read that at the same time. I can't multitask.
I'm trying, keeping up. Could you please give us an example of how to effectively incorporate self-reflection into a specific program? So get really zeroing in on a specific program, specific example. And as part of that, as well as a second question, augmented learning being part of experiential, the types of assessments, rubrics to assess this learning holistically.
So I'll use the example of the Employability Award only because it's the one that I know the best. But when you talk about program, it could be this is an extracurricular primarily program, but you can do this within a curriculum. What we do with the Employability Award is you have to do 100 hours of work experience, 100 hours of volunteering, and 5 other things. Those things can be anything. But for each of those, so 5, 6, 7, each of those 7 things, you have to submit a self-reflection through the system that we use. And that self-reflection requires you to go through a particular process, which is the SEAL process, which we use at UQ, which is situation, effect, action, and learning. Long story, not one for today. But you have to do that. So we require people to do that self-reflection 7 times. And as most educators will know, if you do something 7 times, by that 7th time, you've kind of got it. They then have to submit to say, I would like to apply for the award. And we have an assessment piece at the end, which basically says, okay, bring that together, all of those 7 reflections and the education that you've had through your curriculum, and talk to us about what your value base is, what your value is as a human, how you're going to articulate that value to somebody else, and how you might transfer it. So we actually go through a series of self-reflections to get them to understand that, and then we assess that self-reflection. So that's very specifically about self-reflection. Within an educational context, you will have, and the question was about rubrics, self-reflection rubrics. I can give you other examples from curriculum as well. So we work with a lot of our academic partners here at UQ, and we have courses and programs that actually have that embedded. So if there is somebody who would like to have a look at some of those rubrics, I can probably provide that for them if they want. But that's what we do in the employability award. So it is about doing and trying again and trying again and trying again, and then hopefully they got it by the 8th time at the end of it.
Yeah, and it is all about, of course, helping a student just to go through that journey and giving them a framework. The specific framework we've talked about many times matters less. So it's situation, task, action, result, but actually just going through that critical self-evaluation process and thinking about the next action.
Well, also that STAR one, so the situation, task, action, that's about articulating what you have learned. So the SEAL process takes them through how to identify a learning moment. So again, it's about sort of saying the reflection piece is not about necessarily articulating to somebody else, but actually recognizing for yourself the value of that experience. So like you said, there are a number of different ways that you can frame that. What we've got at UQ is that SEAL methodology, which we co-created with students.
And how can you articulate and unlock, and this goes back to the presentation that Michael made this morning from Faethm, the value of experiential learning on the human, the social, the transdisciplinary, the professional skills. I'm avoiding the word soft skills.
Very good, because they're not soft, they're very hard. And I think for me, those are the kind of the complicated human ways of being. And I think, again, it is about saying, give somebody a complex situation and say, okay, how would you respond to that? So again, if you think about the articulation, it's almost like reverse engineering it and saying, okay, if you're in an interview and they're going to ask you a behavioral competency question, what's your case study that you're going to give? So if the question is something about, tell us about a time when you had to deal with conflict in the workplace, think back about, times when you have had to deal with somebody who was a complete git in the workplace or in the project that you were involved in as part of your studies or whatever. And actually be honest about and provide an authentic narrative about what happened and what did you do and why would you do that differently next time, or would you do that the same next time? So it's about thinking through, not that if you did something wrong, that's a bad thing. It's that if you did something wrong or something didn't go right, that you learned from it. Providing those examples are critical. And certainly for me as an employer, I employ.
We just lost Dino.
That's okay, David, because we're about at time.
We had 27 seconds left on my clock, and we have Dino's frozen there in space. So, thank you so very much, Dino and Beau. It's incredibly exciting to hear about an EdTech company that is enabling this future. Dino, you're back.
Sorry, I got lost. I got overexcited, obviously.
No. You're in a wonderful
commenting. We were almost done.
You were wonderful. You're in a wonderful expository. Yes, exactly. But we're at time anyway. So thank you so much, Dino. It's been a wonderful conversation for a thought-provoking, humanistic look at experiential learning, which is a key bridge to build employability skills and employment, as well as career life outcomes. So thank you, David. Over to you.
Yeah, no, I want to add my thanks there as well. We must have you back, Dino. We want to have another conversation about, I love this idea of technology enabling the innovation strategies that universities are going on. It's a fantastic partnership between an education technology business and the education providers who are trying to make change, and they've got programs, and it's fantastic to see. So we thank you both so very much. We've had a great morning, and that's a great piece of it. Thank you.
No worries.
Thank you.
Our next session, we're really going to connect our morning together. We're going to try and string it together. We started thinking about the third industrial renaissance, and we moved to thinking about connecting current students to real world work, internationally and locally. And now we move into thinking about the world's workforce learning space and an incredible Australian EdTech company that's taking on the world. Our next session is the future of work is now. How do we reskill, upskill, and drive towards lifelong learning using a new paradigm? How do we bridge the gap between formal learning, corporate training, and trying to future-proof employment? And then we're going to be joined by Lindy Richardson from Maddocks, who's going to facilitate this conversation with Andrew Barnes. Lindy, are you with us?
I am. Hi, David.
Hi, Lindy. How's it going? I'm going to leave you to it. I'll allow you to begin the next session. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks, David. Well, thank you. And it sounds like that was a fantastic session that just occurred. And you will have seen me earlier today. So I'm back again to host the next session on the future of work is now, which I think is a great segue from the discussion from Michael this morning, talking about the fact that we need to talk about not the future of work, but the now of work. So I'm joined this morning by Andrew Barnes. Andrew co-founded GoOne in 2015. As CEO, he set strategy and direction for the company, working to unlock new opportunities through learning. Andrew is a Rhodes Scholar and completed a Master's in Education at Oxford University before completing his PhD at the University of Melbourne. Welcome, Andrew.
Thank you, Lindy. Great to be here. It was actually University of Queensland, so to sort of provide a shout out to Dino from the presentation before from UQ as well.
Fantastic. So GoOne, past, present, and future. Can you talk to us about how, and I'm presuming it's not GO1, it's GoOne. Can you talk to us about how GoOne started and what does it look like now?
Yeah, for sure. So four co-founders, three co-founders and myself, started the business in 2015. We had, I suppose, a gut feeling that there was an opportunity around lifelong learning and corporate education more so than what existed as sort of the status quo. And we saw an opportunity to really connect fantastic content creators, whether it's universities or organizations like Blinkist or edX or Harvard Business Publishing or other sort of forms of training with individuals and organizations. And so that's what we set out to do. And 5 years on, that's what we continue to do. You can sort of think of us in a rough sense as sort of like a Spotify for education, particularly focused on adult education and corporate training. We make it really easy to access anything from mental health awareness to how to do a pivot table in Microsoft Excel to leadership skills to very sort of role-specific skills that might be, say, what a registered nurse or a teacher or a lawyer would be looking to sort of continue their education and continue their professional development journey with.
Fantastic. So you've described GoOne as the Spotify of corporate training development. How is personalisation impacting corporate education and personal development?
Yeah, and metaphors are always sort of fraught in the sense that they can be imperfect, but the sort of two elements, if you think of a service such as Spotify, you can sort of think of something similar with Netflix, and they become useful because as consumers, we're familiar with those providers. There's really two core value propositions. One is having an amazing choice of content, but the second, which I think is incredibly important, particularly when you think of education, there's no shortage of information in the world. There's a huge growing domain of knowledge. It's really, and you can sort of think of the same in the world of music. There's a huge variety and choice out there. But I think a core part of the value proposition for those services, and which is very true for ourselves, is how we think about the personalization of learning, particularly within that world of corporate education that I was describing. How do we help people find the needle in the haystack of what they're interested in, what they may need for their role, which will vary across the different locations that we operate in. So you can sort of think that what might be the sort of right professional development journey for a school teacher in Seattle in Washington State in the US may be different to a school teacher in London, different again to someone in Melbourne. And so the journey around that personalization, the recommendation engine is, as you were just describing, a really core part of how we think about our product as well.
When we initially met, Andrew, we were talking about the fact that there is a lot of formal training at the beginning of someone's career, that you do a degree, that you study, and then there seems to be a drop-off in that formal learning. Can you talk to us about what your views are in relation to that and what GoOne is doing to try and change that?
It's a really good question, and one of our investors and big supporter of our business is Andrew Larson, and I was having a conversation with him one evening, and he shared a photo that he'd taken from a conference, and it showed the investment in education per capita on the vertical axis and the age of individuals across the horizontal. And what was that really incredible and very, it obviously makes sense, and it's sort of intuitive when you think of the focus that we as a society place on educating young people within sort of that K-12 instance through to tertiary and higher education. Almost all of the investment in education that we as a society make is for individuals between the ages of 5 and 25. And I think that makes perfect sense in a world where the skills that we acquire, the skills that we then need to utilize throughout our careers and later in life are relatively static. But I think we can all recognize that environment is changing. The rate of change, I think, will continue to increase. Certainly as we think of different domains of knowledge, they're getting deeper and more complex and an increasing need to specialize. And so for us, as we think about industries changing, people needing to reskill and continue to be productive in different career journeys and different career pathways, I think that question of what are we doing to help people upskill and reskill after the age of 25, much later in life, I think that becomes an incredibly important question for us to think about as a society, and for us as we think about the role that we can play. That's been the part of the problem that we're focusing on right now, to go, how do we make it really easy to access fantastic content for someone in an employment setting, and I think that's very complementary to the sort of existing focus that we have around how do we educate people in a K-12, a university and higher education setting.
So we've got a question about the nuts and bolts of that, so it's a good segue. Does the partner client develop the content that sits on your platform, or how does it actually work?
Yes, it's, again, if you think of Spotify, they don't create their own music. And for us, we work with providers such as UNSW or Harvard Business Publishing, Blinkist, that provides great short book summaries, through to edX and hundreds of other providers. We work closely with, say, St John Ambulance to deliver first aid certificates. And so it's really important for us to go, we're able to help from a technology perspective, but we're certainly not the experts in what a registered nurse or a school teacher or a lawyer or an accountant will need. And so what we do is we partner and work with people who are the experts, publishers and authors who do know those domain spaces to make it possible to access that content. Fantastic.
Part of the key to succeeding in the workplace is having certain life skills. What kind of courses can lead with developing these? And we had a quick chat about things like resilience. And I was thinking last night, in our COVID world at the moment, things like working independently, but also working collaboratively. Can you talk about some of those courses that people are looking to help with those types of skills?
Certainly, and it's been really interesting to see different activity so patterns across our platform since March, and we've seen a lot of interest and people seeking out topics such as mental health awareness, working in a more isolated setting, and I think it's a really important topic to have a conversation around and to provide resources for people to be able to access and to be able to understand and sort of answer some of those questions. Equally, on that sort of topic around a work from home environment, we've seen a huge amount of interest from managers and leaders within organizations going, how do you bring a team together? How do you work collaboratively in a remote environment? And so we've definitely seen a lot of activity in that regard. And what has also been incredibly interesting is the differences in access patterns across regions. And so a lot of the activities that I was describing are true for our users within, say, Australia. And then if we look at usage patterns in, say, for example, Singapore, a very close neighbour of Australia, there's been a huge increase in people using the work from home setting to upskill in more technical skills. And so that's been the sort of subjects that have gone right through the roof in that part of the world.
Fantastic. So there's some macro trends in the workplace that we are seeing today. with the labour force, there's more contract-based work, a bit of a gig economy type thing, where people have multiple business relationships. Is that changing what's expected of professionals, and is that changing what you guys are offering in terms of your platform?
I think it's part of a broader trend, and so you're quite correct. You can sort of imagine situations, well, businesses like Uber and Freelancer and others, where it provides for a much greater flexibility for individuals, but it takes it into that sort of employment relationship is much more of a contingent labour or contract relationship. But that's sort of an extreme example of a much broader story, I think. And if you think of that broader story, and again, there's always exceptions to this rule, but from in previous generations, it would be quite normal to have one career or sort of work for an employer for the majority of one's career across multiple decades. And I think right now, the extreme example of people just being in a purely contract role is not the reality for most, but I think it's definitely true that the expectation that someone will work within the same environment for decades at a time is no longer the status quo. It's much more likely for people to change roles, to change employers. And in that situation where someone is changing roles, that's where I think the opportunity to think about how do we gain new skills to move into new roles? How do we think about that part of the equation? And that's why I think that topic that we were talking about earlier, where previously and still today we invest most of our focus in education between the ages of 5 to 25, that becomes a little bit problematic in an environment where after the age of 25, there's still the need to continue to grow and develop new skills. And I think there's such an amazing opportunity to go, how do we help people grow and develop new skills? Because there's so much opportunity for productivity and contributions for people developing and delivering on those skills later in life as well.
Look, I couldn't agree more. And I think part of the reason why I like being a lawyer is because you're learning constantly. Probably I wouldn't have picked learning the amount of legislative change that I've had to over the last couple of months in that short period of time, but nevertheless, you do what you need to do. There has been a focus on nationalisation with COVID. Obviously, we're all looking at internally at our borders, and I'm looking very with admiration at the fact that you are in a workplace with other colleagues around you at the moment. But do you think globalisation is still relevant in this in the environment we're in at the moment?
Yeah, and look, I asked myself the question this morning: should I join from home and dial in solidarity with those in Melbourne and other parts of the world? Yeah, hopefully it sort of provides a taste of normalcy, which we can all sort of look towards, hopefully getting back to in the near future. I think that's very true in the sense that the political rhetoric and certainly the current sort of health and economic situation has meant that we're sort of looking more within our own sort of borders, and there are sort of nationalistic policies that are coming to bear. But overall, that sort of macro trend of the world today is more connected than it was previously. And I think it's pretty, I'm very confident in my belief that in the next decade, the world will continue to be more connected than it ever has been as well. It's entirely possible to communicate across borders. It's possible to do business across borders. And I think despite certain sort of policies and views around nationalism, the world will continue to become more and more connected. And so I think that is another topic as we think about the need to sort of continue to invest in our own individual capabilities and skills, is as we think about that global labour market and it becoming more and more connected, then certain roles will less be geography will become less and less of a factor. And even today, I think with the work from home environment that many of us have been in over the last few months and continue to be in some parts of the world, I think that's reinforced the fact that we can work in a remote fashion and can work in sort of a distance setting. And so I think those two elements with borders being perhaps less of an important topic over the next 10 years because of greater connectivity and the ability for people to work together remotely, then it does lead to sort of questions around how do we organise labour and what are the sort of roles and organisations of the future going to look like.
It's really interesting from we've had a sort of a legal question about how you work out a state-based entitlement such as long service leave. And we've been looking at the scenario of an educational organisation based in Victoria who employs someone who's based in New South Wales to teach students who are based in WA. How do you work out a state-based entitlement? So I think we might see some change in that area as well. Some queries about, again, some nuts and bolts of your business. Does Go1 offerings have value for those who run their own businesses? And how do individuals, I think is a connected question, how do individuals build their own learning journey and what support is available for this?
Yeah, so if you think of someone who runs a business, whether it's a small business or a larger business, the need for training is relevant not just to their employees, but to the employer as well. And I'm sure, Lindy, you're probably more the expert on this topic than myself. But if we sort of think of the sort of role of businesses in helping ensure that their staff are able to be productive, that's something that business owners obviously care about. So helping invest in skills and training and onboarding for their teams. And equally, whilst it may not be the most sort of exciting topic, still compliance training and making sure that staff are able to operate in a safe environment, whether that's sort of physical safety or sort of emotional and mental safety is equally important and is also an important topic for employers to be aware of. And so for us, as we think of some of the topics that we're talking about before in terms of how do we help an individual find the needle in the haystack when it comes to the right content and the right material for their role, we also think of that in terms of how do we help managers and employers find the right material that's going to help their teams in the two sort of categories that I was just talking about before.
Fantastic. Does Go1 connect programs into face-to-face training, such as places like General Assembly?
We do work with organisations that deliver face-to-face training. Unsurprisingly, right now, face-to-face training is not a huge sort of share of what we do. But as I mentioned before, we work with organisations that might deliver a first aid course, as an example. And some elements of delivering a first aid training program can be delivered online. And so you can imagine a lot of theory, the doctor's ABCD, you can sort of run through that in a video, maybe a quiz, but the practical elements of practicing resuscitation, practicing CPR, those elements I think are really important and need to be sort of done in a much more hands-on setting. And so we've got every year hundreds of thousands of people who will complete a first aid certificate through the content providers and publishers that we work with. And so I see the role of, and if you think of sort of education more broadly, the medium through which it's delivered is only one part of it. You can sort of read a book, and I think that's a fantastic way of learning. You can attend a lecture, or you can attend a conference, whether in person or virtual, such as the virtual environment that we're in today. All of those are learning opportunities. And so when we think of our role of helping connect great content with people who are after it, then that includes all of the examples that I was just talking about. And I think face-to-face is going to be incredibly important forever into the future because of some of those elements that we touched on.
Quick question before we finish up about quality control. So how do you ensure courses meet a minimum standard before being added, or is it sort of left sort of laissez-faire between the parties that you connect?
Yeah, so I suppose there's two topics when it comes to quality. Certainly when we think of quality of content on our platform, one is does the content present well? Does it work on a mobile device? Does the video have audio, which is audible? Does it have captions? Can people sort of engage with it? Does it present well? And so that's one part of quality. The second part of quality is from a subject matter perspective. Is the content appropriate? If you're looking to train a registered nurse or a teacher or a lawyer or an accountant or an electrician or any role, how appropriate is the content? And so there's two ways that we approach each of those topics. On the presentation front, we do screen for quality in that regard. We have a team internally that reviews everything that is added to our subscription product to ensure that it meets a minimum quality standard around presentation, that it works across devices, that it'll work for our end customers. And we see that as an important part of what we can do to help inform what is best practice in presenting training materials through our platform. But when it comes to the subject matter expertise side of the equation, our view is we can't possibly hope to be the domain experts in those fields. And so what we do in that regard is we help allow other players, maybe it's industry associations like the Law Society or the Law Institute or the College of Teachers or the governments in certain states or other professional bodies, to signal what they see as quality. And so you may end up with a number of different courses or a number of different sort of learning pathways which may be related to the same topic, all from different providers, and we allow those industry bodies to badge and signal to go, these are the topics, these are the courses which we recognise maybe for continuing professional development credit, or they recognise in other ways. So that way, if you're a user on our platform, you know that the content is going to work. It will sort of play across devices, but equally you can see those badges and understand, okay, well, this is recognised by my industry body, and therefore that gives me a level of comfort that it's going to be of the quality needed for the space in which I work.
So we have another question. MOOCs have a poor completion rate. Are you seeing different outcomes?
Yeah, so MOOCs famously have had very low completion rates. And I think, well, first and foremost, it's an open question as to, is that a good thing or a bad thing? The ability to start something and learn something through that process, but not necessarily complete it, particularly if it's a free online course, may in fact be a good thing. So I think that there is an open question to go, well, if you think of other ways that we might learn, it might be looking up a Wikipedia page or a YouTube page. Do we judge the success of Wikipedia by how many people read the whole article versus just read a segment of it? So I'll leave the sort of philosophical question of whether completion rates are the be-all and end-all to one side. But when it comes to completion rates on our platform, we see close to an 85 to 90% completion rate. And so we're very fortunate that we see really high completion rates. And so it would have been probably easy for me to just contrast ourselves with other providers in the market and say, look how good we are. But I think it is an open question to go, completion rates the metric that we want to hang our hat on, or is it actually more important to understand how we're helping someone with their end goals, how we're helping achieve competency and comprehension? And so that's what we're really focused on is how do we create engagement? How do we help create an environment where people are learning something, enjoying it? And by virtue of that, I think, therefore, we do see high completion rates.
Fantastic. So final question from me. There might be some more from the participants, but what's the trajectory of Go One from here? And would you do anything differently if you had your time again?
I don't have a crystal ball anywhere in the office, so if you've got one, I would love to borrow it. But we're incredibly excited about the space. And as you mentioned in the introduction, I was fortunate enough to do a couple of years of postgrad study in the space of education. But my wife's a school teacher and has been a primary school teacher for over the last 10 years. So she's really the expert in our household when it comes to education. I think it's just a really exciting space for two reasons. One is there's an incredible opportunity to have important impact, whether that's helping a young person to read or write or to understand mathematics, and you can sort of just imagine how impactful those skills are later in life that we all take for granted to have this conversation today, and that they're skills that we've learned early in life, and then if we sort of fast forward that, I think the skills that Go1 as a business is focused on, some of the ones we mentioned, leadership, mental health awareness, the ability to sort of think of time management skills, or continue our professional development journeys in our respective roles and careers, can be equally impactful, I think, as well. So I think education is exciting because there can be that opportunity for impact. And the other thing which is really exciting is we think of our business, and really to sort of answer your question, we've got a couple of million users on our platform. How do we get to 100 million? How do we get to greater reach? And I think that's the opportunity for us, and there's a long way to go on that journey, but it's one that we're tremendously excited about. And in terms of would I do anything different, I'm a big believer that sort of the mistakes that we've made along the way, and we've definitely made mistakes, they've been lessons for us to learn, and it's that's really one of life's great teachers, is by learning from those mistakes, and that I think is in many ways helped get us to where we are today. So I wouldn't change anything.
Can I jump in for a second there, Lindy? I wanted to just quickly add a question in there, if you don't mind, Andrew. I just wanted to think a little bit about just the very big conversation we've been having this morning. So we had, this conversation around really the need to constantly be a lifelong learner with Michael. And then from there, we moved to how do we connect learners from the from the academic world into the industrial world and the world of work. I'm interested about the programs that you deliver on the Go1 platform. Do you map the skills in those to the job requirements that companies have and sort of show a correlation between them?
Yeah, and again, I think it comes into that subject matter component. So what we do is we work with providers that do that mapping. And so I might give two examples.
Yeah.
Say, for example, if you're interested in becoming a registered nurse, you can jump onto Google, type in how to become a registered nurse, and you'll probably see a web page from Seek, and Seek will tell you all of the sort of facts around that particular role, and that will do that for thousands of other roles, including sort of average employment expectations, salary expectations, but also what are the skills that employers are looking for in that particular role. And so Seek, from an employment marketplace, has that data. And on that same page are courses that Go1 provides that you can take, that Seek provides for free to their candidates to then upskill in those particular roles and career options. And so that's one example where skills are being mapped to roles. Another is, as we're talking about with first aid, and the Australian government has mapped out pathways and certain qualifications that are required for certain roles. Say, for example, a school teacher. My wife every year needs to demonstrate that she can do first aid. And so that particular exercise the government has done, and again, when we think of our platform, we go, how do we help connect people to that? So for us, it is very much going, let's take in all of those different data points, whether it's a framework that a federal, a national or state government has put together, where it's a framework that someone like Seek, or we also work with other providers in that market, such as Hayes, which is a large listed recruiting company out of the UK. And how do we then use that to help an individual understand, okay, well, these skills that I'm looking to acquire, or these skills that I have, how does that map to the activities and the roles that I want to do in the future? So definitely is something we do, but the way we do it is again to go, well, we don't have all the answers, but how do we provide that connectivity to still answer those questions?
And I guess that is ultimately the question, I guess, and that is, you guys are building an incredible database of the skills that people are, for want of a better term, interested in acquiring, because they're picking those courses. They're not being necessarily forced to do them. And then obviously how employers are assessing those or accepting those in their job description. So that might be a fantastic point to just simply say thank you so much, Andrew and Lindy. I think we've had a great conversation. It's exciting to hear an Australian EdTech company impacting communities around the world with corporate learning and lifelong learning, and trying to ensure that people are, as workforce ready as possible. So thank you, Andrew, and thank you, Lindy.
No, thank you very much, David. And I might just sort of finish with saying, if anyone's excited about this space, and it's something I'm incredibly excited by, please feel free to just reach out on LinkedIn or whatnot. That sort of platform that we're looking to build out, as David mentioned, love collaborating on it as well. So it's an exciting space, and thank you.
Right, 500 people have just left our live feed to go and look at your LinkedIn profile. Thanks, Andrew. Great. Thanks. Of course, reach out to Andrew on LinkedIn. And thank you, Lindy.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Andrew.
Thanks, guys. So now we move to our final piece of this morning's jigsaw puzzle. So we get to think about this morning, what are the things that people are looking for? We've talked about universities, we've talked about the international and the local context, we've talked about the corporate space. And now we finish with this final piece, and we start to think about how do we connect learners into employment programs and beyond via partnerships between universities, government, private sector, and the technology that connects them all to drive this innovation. And our final session of this morning is really about what is the future of work shaping to be. The digital collaboration is creating innovative opportunities beyond just employment. And I'm going to welcome Hayley Bolding, who actually opened this morning, but I'll welcome her back, who's going to be our moderator for this session. Hayley is the Director of Programs of Practera with deep experience across Australia and Asia. She founded a not-for-profit in India, has managed small and large commercial projects, designed and facilitated programs, and worked with communities and consumers in strategy implementation roles. I'll leave you to it, Hayley. Thank you.
Thank you so much, David. And yes, fabulous to be able to top and tail the program today. I'm really excited to welcome, our speaker today, Fiona Letos, who's the Director of International Education at Global Victoria, who's obviously one of the sponsors here. But for me, what's really exciting about this conversation is that, as you said, David, we've seen these very big macro perspectives, from different universities and around the world, and from some of the EdTech partners that are really shaping this future. And so this conversation I'm really excited about, because we actually get to speak to, that real government perspective that Global Victoria will bring to how they look at these challenges, and some of the strategies moving forward, not only post-COVID, but obviously into the future, and the role that government plays in facilitating those education and industry engagements as well. I should also point out that Fiona and I have amazingly colour coordinated today, and I think that it just proves that a bit of fuchsia pink down in lockdown Melbourne will make for a great conversation. So welcome today, Fiona.
Thanks so much, Hayley. Whatever it takes, and we're all embracing the fuchsia pink at the moment. But really terrific to be here. Thank you so much for the opportunity to talk through some of these really relevant and important issues, particularly in the context of the international education sector and international students.
Absolutely. And so I think what's really great, and where we'll take some of our discussion today, is actually some real live examples. A lot of today has been focused on the future, but Global Victoria can really speak to some of the great initiatives that are already happening or have happened or will now be iterated on as we look forward. So the title today is really around employment futures and the role of employers and educations in the future of work. It'd be really great to just get that perspective from you just on really what Study Melbourne is and its context within Global Victoria. And how you support international students here in Melbourne and obviously across Victoria, and how you really look at that role of employability and graduate employment outcomes in the context of a government and your role within that.
Absolutely, Hayley. So for those who aren't aware, Global Victoria is the Victorian Government's trade facilitation agency, and we also play a key role across government for supporting global economic engagement. So we play a key coordination role. And we also have a really comprehensive international infrastructure. So we have 23 international Victorian Government trade and investment offices, and embedded in that international infrastructure is a global education network. So everything we do has a global, and all of the support that we provide to international students is very much in the context of supporting an ecosystem which enables students to have a truly globally, I think, connected experience whilst they're in Victoria. And so that concept filters through to a lot of our student support initiatives. And, you know, we've been working with international students on these very initiatives to support the development of those soft skills and their employability skills for many years now. So we have a pretty strong track record, and we've built up a terrific suite of programs that we think have been, you know, really important, not just to help students through, you know, normal times, but they've also been absolutely invaluable to help students through, you know, the challenge of COVID-19. So I guess the fundamental principle that we work on is that excellence in education goes well beyond the classroom. And for international students, obviously getting an education in Victoria, it's more than just about the degree or that qualification. More and more there's that emphasis and demand from students on an experience which helps them to build those attributes and leadership skills which will assist in, with their employability in the future. And, you know, we're, as I said previously, Global Victoria is a very globally focused agency, and so we try to bring that that foundation principle into our student initiatives. And we really want to support students to be connected to industry, connected to the broader student community, but also connected globally. And so a couple of examples of how we do that, and one that I'd particularly like to highlight because it's a partnership that we run with Practera, is the LIVE projects. So LIVE stands for Lead, Intern, Volunteer and Experience. And this is an initiative, as I said, that's formed between Study Melbourne and Practera. Practera, a fantastic organisation. And, you know, it's a program that works across a range of priority industries for Victoria. And that program is really designed to meet the skills that international students are going to need in an innovation-driven economy. And so, Hayley, you're probably almost better placed to talk about the success of these projects than I. I mean, I could talk about this all day, but I'd love to hear from your perspective in terms of your observations of some of those great success stories coming through the LIVE initiative.
Yeah, beautiful. I think that's a great segue. And again, the great thing that we get to discuss and really share today with, you know, everyone online and around the world is, you know, a lot of discussion this week is going to focus around partnerships and the involvement of partnerships. And Fiona and I are in one in terms of Practera and our work with Study Melbourne. So I wonder if we might be able to bring up some of those slides, and I can just talk to everyone around how we actually began to work together. As Fiona mentioned, obviously Study Melbourne, that initiative, and it was very close to Practera's heart when we started working together about 3 years ago, you know, which was really on how do you support international students to build the employability skills. It's been the discussion of all the topics today, and I know for the rest of the EdTech Summit, but really provide those social connections and those professional connections. So if we can just go back to the previous slide, that'd be great. And so really the way that LIVE Projects works, it's a Study Melbourne initiative. We are an EdTech company and we are powering this this program, but it really is a Study Melbourne initiative that students participate in. Very simple concept. It adheres to a lot of the themes that we've heard about today. It's a collaborative project experience that international students undertake, where they work as part of an international, multidisciplinary, interinstitutional team to actually do a project for a Victorian client. And so what's been fantastic about this initiative is it's been that real win-win-win scenario, which is what you always look for in a great partnership. So obviously for Study Melbourne, it meets that agenda that that Fiona spoke to around the kind of goals and initiatives about how they support international students. And we know that international students really struggle when they're you know, studying here to get some of those internships or job or Australian cultural exposure and experiences, you know, why they're studying. So we hit that and obviously support Study Melbourne's mission. We are able to collaborate between Study Melbourne and the university sector. So we've had 15 institutions from Victoria, from TAFEs, you know, to all of the Victorian universities being able to participate in this program. Industry also get to be able to connect into this program by putting projects forward. It's a big ask sometimes to get an internship, for a company to put forward. But when we ask them to participate in a 3-week project where they'll get a team of students to solve a challenge that they might be having, it's a really great value proposition. And our technology at the heart of it, which is Practera, driven by Practera, glues all these stakeholders together. And really allows us to do that. So we're going for 3 years now, and we've had close to 2,000 students go through the program, which is amazing. It's close to 600 industry professionals and also mentors. So mentorship and that feedback loop that we get from industry professionals being able to support students while they do a journey like this has just been incredible. What I'm really proud of is obviously the work that the students have done and being able to deliver, but really is also those connections. So some of the fantastic, and maybe I'll just give an example to one of the great teams that I had involved last year. So we had the Melbourne Convention Bureau, great Victorian business, looking to, have a project done. They got an international student team, live projects team that worked for them. What was incredible is that team was made up of an economics student from RMIT, an art student from Melbourne, a fashion student from Kangan TAFE, and all of everything in between. So the students really got that international work experience. And then they had their great client, which was Melbourne Convention Bureau, who put the challenge to them about how they could do some analysis of whether Victoria's hotels were up to some of the sustainability goals and levels, that were set internationally. That 3-week project allowed the students to get exposure to a whole new sector, to some industry professionals. They're able to work with their mentor to produce a really great outcome for their client, and obviously at the end of that present that and have those outcomes there. And so for the students, great professional experience they can call on to show a Victorian supported initiative that they've actually gained real world learning through. But for the Melbourne Convention Bureau, fantastic outcome in terms of that research then went into some international grants and programs that actually upped our sustainability level here in Victoria in terms of our hotels compliance. So again, those great outcomes, really I've got a million stories like that. More broadly, we've really been able to hold those statistics and those inputs as well. So we've had, just even in the last year, 94% of the students said that they had improved their employability skills. Obviously, 92 said they actually increased their professional, but also their personal networks. And we know that, and I know for Global Victoria and for Study Melbourne, these lifelong connections for students, into the Victorian economy are incredibly invaluable moving forward. So it's been an amazing partnership that we've been able to deliver through COVID. So obviously we can speak a little bit later to actually the ability, because this was actually powered, through a technology platform, for us to transition very easily into virtual when COVID hit, and we've had more than 600 students go through the program, across a couple of programs with Global Victoria, and those stats and the feedback from industry have held. So a really great example, and again, Fiona and I could talk to it all day. Obviously, we'll continue back onto our discussion, but for us, it's been an amazing partnership and something we really want to highlight of just how successful these kind of partnerships can be, but also, the outcomes for students and industry, have been really evident.
Absolutely, Hayley. And I don't think a day goes by where I'm not approached by an international student on LinkedIn telling me how valuable they found the experience. So really terrific feedback, and that is one fantastic example that you gave. There are so many examples like that. So we're so supportive of this partnership. We think it's an absolute winner.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think it's supposed to be great to sort of continue on with that theme, because obviously, we've been meeting a need, and the employability skills and the development of those has been a key driver of, say, live projects as an example. But obviously, this summit has really focused on that future of work and the way in which employment is changing and the way in which those skills are changing. One of the great things we're able to say to live project students when we took them through the orientation is that digital capability and the ability to work collaboratively as part of a team in a digital environment are skills of the future, but they're skills of right now because of COVID. It'd be really great just to get your perspective on, how the future of work you think will, is shaping up, and what are the kind of skills that are really important that the students prepare for, from a Study Melbourne perspective.
Yeah, absolutely, Hayley. This is the question of the day, I think. what will the future of work look like, and how do we support. So from a Global Victoria's perspective, how do we support international students to be the leaders of tomorrow? I think, as you mentioned, Hayley, obviously, new technologies and innovation is driving a need for a particular skill set. But I think it's also really important to recognise that some of those softer skills, those sort of multidisciplinary skills, that are going to be absolutely critical for our leaders of the future are the skills that international students really need to hone and acquire. And it's a key focus of Global Victoria through our various initiatives. So how can we support those international students to build those skills, such as whether it's a collaborative approach, those cross-cultural competencies, how do we foster, a culture of a creative approach to problem solving, and of course the skill that all of us need at the moment, which is resilience, and a resilient approach, a resilient leadership approach. So how can we create those leaders of the future that organisations are going to want to be able to steer teams and steer their organisations through any future challenges, future crises, and all of the risks that a future economic kind of landscape will throw at us. And so we think that those softer skills will absolutely be in high demand. And I think an important sort of additional issue that we also kind of bring into a lot of our program responses is the fact that, international students, the very experience of leaving home, coming to a foreign country for many years, building a life in a foreign country from scratch. International students, through their very circumstances, need to be resilient. So many of them already have a good foundation, I think, in terms of being resourceful, and I think those are skills that we really want to nurture and encourage, because they are absolutely critical, I think, for our workers and our leaders of the future. And I might, Hayley, just give you one example of a great program that we're rolling out at the moment. So the program's called Leadership Labs.
Awesome.
It's a program that really focuses on, obviously, enhancing students' leadership skills, but it helps students to stay connected to each other, which is particularly relevant at the moment, but it also connects students to business leaders. So we're focusing on supporting students to come up with innovative projects that respond to some of the current economic and social challenges that we're experiencing. And the frame of reference that we're asking students to build their projects sort of within is the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So students come together, they develop solutions to some of these SDG issues, and then the program culminates in the students pitching their ideas at a Leadership Labs pitch night. So it's a program that really supports, as I referenced before, a creative approach to problem solving, a collaborative approach, but also taps into those leadership and those entrepreneurial skills that students are going to need. And, it's a program that, as I said, culminates in the students having to stand up and pitch and really advocate for and be able to articulate the objectives of their project and how their project is going to make an impact. We've had a great response to that program. So that's been a fantastic initiative that's really supported students also through COVID.
Absolutely. And we've got a few questions coming through, which I'll just summarise because I know that was a topic that you and I both wanted to touch on. So some of the questions are really around what are those kind of employment benefits and outcomes that students have had through participating in these kind of programs, but really the sort of social connections or the things beyond those very hard, tangible couple of week experiences. What are the kind of impacts? And I know that really leads into some of the broader work that Global Victoria is really thinking around, is around these international alumni networks. As you said, it's a very profound thing to come and study here, and undertake that, the very key part of an international student's life. And programs like Live and Leadership Labs actually really bind and connect them to have real connections and really meaningful relationships. And so we're really interested to see, your reflections on, what beyond a lot of these initiatives and the students' experience here in Victoria are we going to leverage off in the future?
Yeah, absolutely, Hayley. And the example that you gave previously about that Live project, I think is a great way to illustrate the importance of creating connections between students who may not necessarily have made a connection. So, having an engineering student at Monash work on a project with a fashion student at Kangan TAFE, I think is
brilliant.
A connection, and you just never know where those connections are going to lead into the future. So not just supporting and creating connections within the student community here, but also for government and for industry. These programs are a way for government and industry to maintain a connection with those students beyond their study experience. So for government, we think it's incredibly important to maintain a lifelong connection to students who've studied in Victoria. We work today with ministers in foreign governments who studied in Victoria 20 years ago. We work on trade and investment opportunities with Victorian alumni. So they're connections that have been nurtured over years and years and years and years. You leverage the fact that international students have that deep and emotional connection to Victoria. They know Victoria so well. They've got a lived experience here, and if they go back to their home country, they want to maintain that connection to Victoria. And through government, through trade, and from a Global Victoria perspective, obviously we focus on trade and investment, but that is a terrific platform to maintain engagement with alumni. And many alumni that we work with are unofficial ambassadors for Victoria. So to have alumni represent support further connections within industry, in our priority markets, is an absolutely critical thing for our economic global engagement. So I think, maintaining that connection, and you can only maintain that connection, I think, if the government does everything within its power to make sure that student has the best possible experience they can have while they're here, and that experience stays with them throughout their life and throughout their professional career.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's those, we can read a book, but it's not until we experience something. And so I think that those relationships and those real experiences, they stick in. You get those messages all the time on LinkedIn, but they really stick with students. And I think that's connections we'll be able to leverage off well into the future. So while there are initial investments in a student now, the potential of where those connections go, the engineering, the fashion student from different parts of the world connected to Victoria in the future, for me, that's the really, really exciting piece. As we sort of move through, we're getting some of the questions, which is really around some of the, obviously we've got some great feedback on the GVIP and Leadership Labs and live projects, which is fantastic. In terms of, I'd love to talk about just, partnerships and collaboration across industry and government, with education providers and obviously edtech companies like Practera and campus consultancy, which you referenced before. All of these are really incredible in terms of being able to structure and deliver at scale these kind of programs. I'd just love to see how you're kind of looking at partnership and collaboration collaboration and what that really looks like. I suppose we can look forward to, there's a bunch of questions here just around, how these kind of programs will continue in the future and what Global Victoria is looking at in a post-COVID world, where we know that international education is critical, and how that it plays out in Victoria particularly. Economic recovery is going to be a big part of the story.
Absolutely, and I'm hoping you can't hear my very noisy children in the background. I'm just going to soldier on as if we can't hear that noise. So I think to answer the last question first, so from a Global Victoria perspective, we are looking at what levers the government has available to it to support this sector to reset and recover as quickly as possible. Fundamentally, student mobility and an ability to bring students back to Victoria is absolutely critical to that. And our ability to do that is fundamentally based on the perception of international students and prospective international students on not just the experience that they're going to have in Victoria, that it's a safe and welcoming place to live and study, but that there is a framework and a support system there to position them in the best possible way that they are going to have, secure employment coming out of their education experience. So employability in terms of their prospective students' decision-making process is absolutely critical. And so when we're looking from a government perspective in terms of what an economic recovery strategy looks like for this sector, student initiatives that focus on employability, leadership, and those critical skills for the future are absolutely critical. And, we're really invested in making sure that these programs have a life beyond COVID and that these programs are front and centre and continue to support the sector and ensure that, Victoria is continued to see as a world-class study destination. And just on your first question, Hayley, in terms of the importance of collaborations and partnerships across industry, government and education providers, that is absolutely, a critical way to ensure the success of these student initiatives. It's really important that collaboration is relevant. It's relevant to the skills needs of the future, and that those programs offer students deep experience that they can draw on and demonstrate to future employers that they've had this sort of valuable kind of work experience opportunity whilst they're in Victoria. We've got so many great programs at the moment, but another program that I just wanted to touch on, which is underway at the moment, is called the Civic Labs Accelerator Program. So this is a partnership between Study Melbourne, the Department of Premier and Cabinet, and Launch Vic. And so the premise of this program is that government agencies present Launch Vic with a challenge. So a challenge that particular agency is facing that's relevant to their portfolio. And then Launch Vic presents that challenge and calls for pitches from startups to come up with innovative solutions to address these complex public sector challenges. And so we have a challenge out at the moment which talks to and seeks innovative solutions to some of the particular and complex needs of international students, particularly during COVID. That's around feeling connected, supported, and enabling international students to build resilience to get through COVID. We've had such a fantastic response to that challenge. I think we had about 60 pitches, which we're working through now. And so, it's not just engaging with startups that are Victorian startups, but it's also recognising that a lot of international students themselves are startup founders, and they study, but they're also quite entrepreneurial. So they're, while they're studying, they're setting up a startup company as well. And so we've got a lot of international students engaging as pitchers for that program. So it's got these sort of multiple kind of additional benefits. So yeah, that's a fantastic program that we're running at the moment, which just seems to be going from strength to strength.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Hayley and Fiona. And I'll begin by saying, Fiona, we didn't hear your children, so I feel calm that we did. There was one big crash, and I'm worried about what's actually has fallen over out there. But I'm sure the kids who did it are no longer there; they've gone. They're breaking curfew rules. Hayley, Fiona, thank you very much. Fantastic to hear how government, industry, education, and edtech companies are collaborating to drive connection and ultimately to accelerate student experience. So, a fantastic session. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
This morning we've had a great conversation, and we started by rethinking our fears and focusing on the possibilities of a third industrial revolution. We then moved to discussing a global and the local context for connecting education and work before moving to the need to build lifelong learning mindsets to ensure that we are future ready. This is all being underpinned by great Australian edtech companies and the entrepreneurs that are founding those businesses, and the collaboration between the really key stakeholders in this ecosystem, the edtech companies themselves, the education providers, and the industry participants that enable this whole thing. If you've missed any of this morning's sessions, you'll be able to find them online after the conference, so watch out on our website and the social media for updates. This is only the first part of day 2, so please join us again at 3 p.m. this afternoon, where we consider the Victorian EdTech sector before having an in-depth conversation with one of Australia's, I can say, the Australia's leading EdTech entrepreneur, Tim Power, who is one of the co-founders of 3P Learning. For the entrepreneurs that are going to be with us, who are with us now and will be with us this afternoon, there's an incredible opportunity that we've created today. And that is, you can actually go and talk directly with potential customers. There's 3 voice of the customer sessions. You can pick which one you want to, whether you want to go to the workforce one, the higher education and vet one, or whether you want to go to the K-12 school, but you'll look at the school section where you'll actually go and be able to talk to actual educators and understand what they're working on now, what their challenges and what their opportunities are. So thank you all for being here on the morning of day 2 of the Melbourne EdTech Summit. We'll see you again at 3 o'clock.